The air in the oak-panelled conference room of Pembroke Sons solicitors was thick with the smell of old paper, lemon polish, and a tension I could taste at the back of my throat. My hands, clasped tightly in my lap, were cold despite the overly warm room. Outside the tall, rain-streaked windows, London moved on in a grey February blur. But in here, time felt suspended, viscous with grief and dreadful anticipation. I was 20, a second-year history student at Cambridge, and for the last 2 weeks, I had been an orphan. For all that mattered, my real parent, the only one who had ever counted, was gone. Eleanor Langdon, my aunt, my guardian, my mother in every way that shaped a soul, had slipped away peacefully in her sleep at her beloved Cliff's End in Cornwall. The heart that had loved me so fiercely, and fought for me so tirelessly, had simply stopped. The world had lost its axis. Now, I sat on the wrong side of a vast, polished mahogany table, facing Mr. Alistair Pembroke. He was the picture of an old London solicitor, silver-haired, bespectacled, wearing a suit that seemed pressed a century ago. His expression was one of practiced, somber neutrality. To his right sat a severe-looking woman, his assistant, with a stenographer's pad poised. The only other person in the room was Mrs. Higgins, Eleanor's housekeeper of 40 years. A solid, comforting presence in black wool, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. She was here as a witness, a familiar anchor in this sea of legal strangeness. Miss Langdon, Mr. Pembroke began, his voice a dry rustle. Please accept, once more, our deepest condolences on your loss. Eleanor was not just a client, she was a friend, a remarkable woman. Thank you, I managed, my own voice sounding small. Mia Langdon, I bore her surname. She'd had it legally changed for me when I was 6. A fresh start, she'd said, her hands warm on my shoulders. Our name. We are gathered today for the reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Langdon. He intoned, adjusting his glasses. He opened a heavy, cream-colored document tied with faded red ribbon. The familiar, elegant sweep of Eleanor's signature graced the bottom of the first page. My throat tightened. The first part was procedural. Bequests to staff, a generous pension for Mrs. Higgins, a sum for the gardener, a donation to the Royal National Lifeboat Institution in St. Moors. Each one was so her, practical, kind, rooted in her world. I swallowed hard, focusing on the grain of the wood in the table. And to my beloved niece and daughter in spirit, Mia Eleanor Langdon, Mr. Pembroke read, and his tone shifted, minutely, into something softer. I looked up, meeting his eyes briefly. I give, devise, and bequeath the following. Firstly, my entire estate, comprising the freehold property known as Cliff's End, St. Moors, Cornwall, with all its contents, lands, and appurtenances. A sob caught in Mrs. Higgins's throat. It was expected, Eleanor had always said the house would be mine, but hearing it formalized, in this cold room, was a physical blow of love and loss. Cliff's End wasn't just a house, it was the repository of every happy memory I possessed. Summers of salt and sunshine, books by the fire, Eleanor's laugh echoing in the hall. Mr. Pembroke cleared his throat and continued. Secondly, I give the entirety of my residuary estate, after the payment of debts, taxes, and the aforementioned bequests, to be held in a trust for the said Mia Eleanor Langdon. The trust, to be administered by Sterling Trust Management, will provide for her maintenance, education, and welfare until she attains the age of 21 years. Upon her 21st birthday, the remaining capital and all accrued income shall pass to her absolutely, free of all restrictions. The numbers came next. A list of investments, bonds, a portfolio. The final figure, the residuary estate, made the air leave my lungs. £2.5 million, not dollars, pounds sterling. A fortune. A staggering, impossible fortune. I stared, unseeing, at the green-shaded banker's lamp on the desk. 250,000 would have been life-changing. This was astronomical. This was the result of a lifetime of shrewd investment, frugal living, and, I knew, a deep-seated desire to make me safe. Forever safe. Tears, hot and silent, spilled down my cheeks. This wasn't about money. It was the final, overwhelming testament to her love. A love so vast it sought to armor me against the world even after she had left it. The primary trustee and executor of the will, and manager of the said trust, is Mr. Richard Sterling of Sterling and Vaughan, Chancery Lane. Mr. Pembroke concluded. He has been briefed and will be in contact with you shortly, Miss Langdon, to discuss the administration. Do you have any questions at this juncture? I shook my head, unable to speak. Questions? I had a universe of them, but none for this kind. Elderly man. They were for the empty armchair by the window at Cliff's End. For the phone that would never ring again with her voice. Why did you have to go? How do I do any of this without you, Mrs. Higgins reached over and squeezed my hand. Her grip was rough and real. She loved you so. Child, she whispered, her Cornish accent thick with emotion. Wanted you set for life. I was about to nod, to try and form some word of thanks to Mr. Pembroke, when the heavy door to the conference room swung open with a force that was entirely at odds with the room's sepulchral hush. Two people stood framed in the doorway. For a dizzying second, my mind refused to process the image. It was like two ghosts from a bad dream had decided to materialize in the wrong story. Jonathan and Victoria Langdon. My parents. 16 years. 16 years since a 4-year-old me had waited, and waited, and then waited some more on the steps of my primary school. Until a concerned teacher called the only other contact, Eleanor. 16 years of birthday cards that never came. Of Christmases with only one present under the tree from Mum and Dad that I knew, even at 8, had been bought and wrapped by Auntie Ella. 16 years of a silence so complete it had become a presence in itself. A void where parents should have been. And now, here they were. Jonathan looked older. Of course. The handsome, dissolute charm that flickered in my earliest memories had hardened into a sort of polished weariness. His hair was silvered at the temples, expensively cut. He wore a cashmere coat over a suit that probably cost more than my entire term's rent. Victoria clung to his arm, a vision in tailored taupe. Her face, still beautiful, was carefully composed into an expression of tragic concern. But her eyes, the same light hazel as mine, darted around the room, calculating, taking in the opulent surroundings. The solicitor, the document on the table. Mia. Victoria breathed. The word a dramatic sigh. She took a step forward, a hand fluttering to her chest. My darling girl. All the air was sucked from the room. My blood turned to ice, then to fire. I couldn't move. I just stared. Mr. Pembroke stood, his brows drawn together. I beg your pardon. This is a private meeting. You cannot. We are Mia's parents, Jonathan announced, his voice a rich baritone that filled the space. It was a voice used to being listened to. A voice that brooked no argument. He offered a thin, humorless smile to the solicitor. Jonathan and Victoria Langdon. We've come for the reading of my late sister-in-law's will. As Mia's natural guardians and next of kin, it is our right to be present. He emphasized the words natural guardians as if they were a magic incantation. You're right. The words were out of my mouth before I could think. Sharp and brittle as glass, I found myself standing, my chair scraping harshly on the parquet floor. You have no rights here. You gave up any rights when you left me at school like a forgotten parcel. Victoria's face crumpled, a masterpiece of wounded maternal feeling. Oh, Mia, please, that's not fair. You were so little. You couldn't possibly understand. Understand what? I shot back, the anger that had been a cold stone in my belly for most of my life finally melting, flooding my veins. That you had better places to be? That I was inconvenient? I understood enough. I understood waiting. I understood that Aunt Eleanor was the one who came. She was the one who fed me, who held me when I cried, who wanted me. Where were you? Jonathan's smile didn't waver, but it tightened at the edges. He approached the table, ignoring me for a moment, addressing Mr. Pembroke, I apologize for my daughter's distress. It's been a difficult time for us all. Eleanor's passing was a shock. But children's memories are fragile things, colored by emotion. The truth is, we went through a period of profound difficulty, financial strains, marital strains. We believed it was in Mia's best interest to stay with her aunt temporarily, while we got back on our feet. Temporarily. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. 16 years is a rather long temporary, don't you think? I didn't get a single phone call. Not one visit. We wanted to. Victoria cried, her eyes now genuinely shining with tears of self-pity. I was sure. We did. But Eleanor, she made it so difficult. She turned you against us. We thought it best to give you space. To let you settle. You're lying. I said flatly. The shock was wearing off. Replaced by a white-hot rage. She never said a word against you. Not one. She said you had your own path. She let me make up my own mind. And my mind is made up. You left. You don't get to walk back in now. Jonathan's patience snapped. The facade of calm cracked. We are your parents. He hissed, leaning on the table. That is a biological and legal fact that no amount of childish temper can change. We never signed away our parental rights. Never. A temporary arrangement, however prolonged, does not negate the sacred bond of blood. He turned back to Mr. Pembroke, his tone shifting to one of loyally command. Now, as her legal guardians, we will need to see the will. All matters of inheritance, property, and trust funds for a minor are naturally our responsibility. We will, of course, act in Mia's best interests, guiding her until she reaches the age of majority and, indeed, beyond. The gall of it stole my breath. My best interests. The trust fund. Cliff's End. That's what this was about. It was so transparent, so vile, that for a moment I was speechless. They'd smelled money. The vultures had circled and now they'd landed. Mr. Pembroke looked deeply uncomfortable. Mr. and Mrs. Langdon, while I acknowledge your biological relationship, the will is quite clear in its bequests to Miss Langdon, and the appointed trustee is Mr. Richard Sterling. The matter of guardianship, given Miss Langdon's age, is a complex one, but she is 20, not a child in need of. She is a vulnerable young woman who has just suffered a traumatic loss. Victoria interjected, her voice a syrup-coated knife. Surrounded by people who may have undue influence. We are her family, her real family. It is our duty to step in and protect her. From exploitation, from poor decisions. We insist on reviewing the estate documents immediately and will be consulting our own solicitor to ensure this so-called trust is properly managed. By us. They were trying to bulldoze him. To use the sheer, brazen force of their claim to overwhelm procedure. And for a terrifying moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Mr. Pembroke's eyes. The law was a tangled thing. And they were here. Loud. Present. Demanding. The weight of natural parents was a heavy one to push against. Jonathan saw it too. A triumphant gleam entered his eyes. He reached into his inner breast pocket. I have here copies of the original birth certificate, and various correspondence that clearly shows our ongoing concern. This notion that we abandoned our child is a malicious fiction, likely propagated to alienate her from us. Now, the will, if you please. He held out his hand, as if expecting Mr. Pembroke to simply hand over Eleanor's last wishes. It was at that precise moment that the other door to the conference room, the one leading to the firm's inner chambers, opened silently. A man walked in. He was perhaps in his late 40s, tall, with an athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit did nothing to hide. His hair was dark, shot with a distinguished silver at the temples. He had the kind of face that was all angles and intelligence, with cool, grey eyes that took in the scene in one swift, comprehensive glance. He carried an air of absolute, unshakable authority, not the dusty, academic kind of Mr. Pembroke, but the sharp, decisive authority of a general surveying a battlefield. Mr. Pembroke, the man said, his voice a deep, calm baritone that nonetheless cut through the tension like a blade. My apologies for the interruption. The matter in chambers took less time than anticipated. Mr. Pembroke's shoulders sagged in visible relief. Mr. Sterling, not at all. Your timing is, as ever, impeccable. Sterling, Richard Sterling, the trustee. My parents turned. Jonathan's outstretched hand slowly lowered. Victoria's performative sorrow froze on her face. Richard Sterling's gaze swept over them. Polite, inquiring, utterly devoid of recognition. I see you have other guests. I can wait outside. No, please, Mr. Pembroke said quickly. Mr. Sterling, may I present Mr. Jonathan and Mrs. Victoria Langdon. They are the parents of the beneficiary, Miss Langdon. Mr. and Mrs. Langdon. This is Mr. Richard Sterling of Sterling and Vaughan. He is the appointed executor and trustee under Miss Eleanor Langdon's will. A flicker of something, wariness, calculation, passed behind Jonathan's eyes. He forced the smile back onto his face, extending his hand again, this time in greeting. Sterling, a pleasure. We were just discussing the administration of the estate. As Mia's parents, we'll naturally be taking a leading role in liaising with you. We'll need to set up a meeting at your earliest convenience to go over the trust structures. We have some concerns about the current arrangements. Sterling took Jonathan's hand, the shake brief and firm. His expression didn't change. I see. He released the hand and turned his gaze to me. You must be Mia. I am so very sorry for your loss. Eleanor spoke of you constantly. It was always, my Mia. She was immensely proud of you. His words, direct and sincere, were a balm. He had known her, not just as a client, but personally. Thank you, I whispered, my voice hoarse. He gave me a small, grave nod, then turned back to my parents. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. His polite mask was still in place, but his eyes had turned to flint. Mr. and Mrs. Langdon, he began, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. Before we discuss any meetings or concerns, there is a preliminary matter, a point of clarity, if you will. He placed the slim leather folder he was carrying on the table, but didn't open it. He didn't need to. He carried the information in his head, in the steady, relentless certainty of his demeanor. When Eleanor Langdon first instructed my firm, which was approximately 18 years ago, regarding the formal, permanent legal guardianship of her then 4-year-old niece, Mia, she was understandably anxious to ensure the child's future was secure. Irrevocably so. Victoria made a small, choked sound. Jonathan's smile was now a rigid line. I'm not sure what ancient history has to do with, it has everything to do with today. Sterling continued, as if he hadn't spoken. His voice was still calm, but it now carried the weight of a judge's gavel. The order granted by the family court at that time was not a temporary arrangement. It was a final care order, superseding parental responsibility, followed by a special guardianship order awarded solely to Eleanor Langdon. These orders were granted on the basis of proven, sustained neglect and abandonment, and the parents demonstrated inability to provide stable or safe care. They were never appealed. They were never overturned. He paused, letting the legal terminology hang in the air, each word a brick in a wall he was building around me. Furthermore, he went on, his eyes now fixed on Jonathan with a dispassionate intensity. Eleanor was meticulous. She was also deeply protective. She was aware, for instance, of a certain episode in Surrey, a conviction for fraud, relating to a speculative property investment scheme that defrauded several elderly investors. A suspended sentence, I believe, but a conviction nonetheless. She was also aware of subsequent financial entanglements that reinforced her view that Mia's interests, her safety, her stability, her future, would be best served by a clear, legal separation from that particular influence. The color drained from Jonathan's face, leaving a sickly, waxy pallor. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a shock that was entirely Terrifyingly genuine. The performance was over. The masks had shattered. "How dare you?" Jonathan blustered. But the force was gone. It was the weak protest of a man whose cards had just been laid bare on the table. Those allegations were, "That is a private matter, it is a matter of public record." Sterling corrected him softly. "As are the court orders. Which I have here." He finally tapped the leather folder. "Certified copies. Along with Eleanor's will, which contains a specific interim clause, a no contest clause. Mr. Langdon, it states that if any person named in the will, or any person claiming a relationship to the beneficiary, challenges the will or the terms of the trust, and that challenge is deemed by the trustee, that is myself, to be frivolous or malicious, that person shall forfeit any nominal bequest they might have received and shall be liable for all legal costs incurred by the estate in defending the challenge." He leaned forward, just slightly. "Eleanor left you a bequest. A small one. A sum of £5,000 each. A gesture. She told me. So they cannot say I left them nothing. But that bequest is conditional. It is conditional on you not making a claim against Mia's inheritance, not challenging it, not harassing her for it, not attempting to exert parental influence to control it." He straightened up, his gaze sweeping over both of them. "By walking in here today, asserting your natural rights, and demanding control over an estate left entirely to Mia, you have, in my judgment as trustee, already triggered the preliminary conditions of that clause. You are not her guardians. You have no legal standing. You are, in the eyes of this will and the preceding courts, irrelevant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, of a world collapsing inward. Jonathan Langdon looked as if he had been struck. All the polished charm, the bluster, the sense of entitlement, had evaporated, leaving behind a shell of a man, exposed and furious. Victoria was trembling, her carefully constructed persona in ruins, staring at Sterling as if he were a snake that had just spoken. Sterling paid them no more mind. He turned to me. "Miss Langdon, Mia, your aunt's instructions were explicit. The house, the funds, are yours. My role is to ensure they pass to you, intact and secure, according to her wishes. If these people," he said, with a slight, dismissive nod towards my parents, "attempt to contact you, harass you, or initiate any legal action, you are to inform me immediately. Do you understand?" I could only nod, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Good." He finally looked back at Jonathan and Victoria. His voice was ice cold. "Final. I think this meeting is over. I would advise you, strongly, to take your £5,000 consolations and leave. Do not approach Mia again. The legal path you are contemplating is not only destined to fail spectacularly, but it will also become prohibitively expensive for you. Very, very quickly. Good day." For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint tick of a clock on the mantelpiece and the ragged intake of Victoria's breath. Then, without a word, Jonathan Langdon turned. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred, for Sterling, for me, for the world that had just denied him. He took Victoria's arm, his grip so tight his knuckles were white, and almost dragged her from the room. She stumbled once, casting a last, desperate, furious look over her shoulder, not at me, but at the folder on the table containing the proof of their ruin. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence they left in their wake was different. It was stunned, but clean. The foul, oppressive pressure was gone. I swayed on my feet. Mrs. Higgins was beside me in an instant, guiding me back into my chair. There, my lamb. It's over. They're gone. Mr. Pembroke was mopping his brow with a handkerchief. Good heavens. Most extraordinary. I had no idea. Mr. Sterling. That matters were so, Eleanor wished to keep it private unless absolutely necessary. Sterling said, his voice losing its courtroom edge. He pulled out a chair and sat down opposite me, his expression softening into something that approached kindness. She hoped it would never be necessary. But she was a realist. She suspected they might reappear. She wanted you protected. I looked at him. At this stranger who had just waged a war for me in the space of 3 minutes. The fraud conviction. The court orders, she never told me. She didn't want to burden you with the ugliness. He said. She wanted you to have a childhood. She wanted you to remember them. Or not remember them. As you chose. Not as the people documented in police and court reports. Her job, as she saw it, was to love you and build a wall between you and that past. My job, as she saw it, was to be the cornerstone of that wall if it was ever tested. He pushed the leather folder across the table to me. These are yours now. The originals are in my vault. You should have them. You should know what she did for you. I touched the cool leather. It felt like a shield. And the claws. The £5,000, a faint, grim smile touched his lips. A piece of tactical genius. It's a deterrent. By leaving them something, however small. She gave them a vested interest in not challenging the will. To challenge it is to automatically lose that bequest and face paying costs. It focuses the mind of even the most avaricious individual. She knew her sister. Unfortunately. All too well. I thought of the look on my father's face. The sheer, unvarnished greed. Followed by the shock of being outmaneuvered. I don't think it worked. I said quietly. I don't think they're focused. I think they're angry. Richard Sterling's grey eyes met mine. And in them I saw no platitudes. No empty reassurance. Only a steely, unwavering certainty. Then they are fools as well as scoundrels. He said. And we will be ready. You are not alone in this. Mia. You have the law. You have the truth. And you have me. For the first time since the door had opened and my past had come crashing back in. I took a full, deep breath. The battle, I somehow knew, was not over. It had only just begun. But in this quiet, paneled room, with the ghost of my aunt's fierce love hanging in the air and this formidable, quiet man now at my side, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt a flicker of hope. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing away the specters of my parents. The silence they left behind was profound, ringing in my ears. It wasn't peaceful, it was the stunned, hollow quiet after an explosion. I stared at the spot where they had stood, half expecting them to rematerialize, to keep arguing, to shatter this fragile new reality. My hands trembled violently in my lap. I clasped them together, feeling the cold shock leaching into my bones. Tea, Mrs. Higgins declared, her voice a sturdy anchor in the swirling unreality. Strong tea. With 3 sugars. She bustled out, presumably to find Mr. Pembroke's assistant, leaving me alone with the 2 men. Mr. Pembroke sank into his chair, looking older than he had an hour ago. He removed his glasses and polished them slowly with a handkerchief. My dear girl, he said, his voice thick. I had no idea. Eleanor, she never hinted it would be so contentious. She merely instructed that Mr. Sterling be present. I assumed it was a formality. Richard Sterling, in contrast, seemed utterly composed. The energy that had crackled from him during the confrontation had been banked to a steady, formidable calm. He took the seat beside me, not opposite, eliminating the barrier of the vast desk. It was a small, deliberate gesture that made him feel like an ally, not an authority figure. They knew, didn't they? I asked, my voice a raw scrape. About the money. The house. How? Sterling nodded once. A short, sharp motion. Undoubtedly. Probate is a public process in this country. Mia. Not the sums, but the fact of a grant. The executor's name. For someone with the inclination, or the desperation, to look. It's not difficult to find. A will leaving a substantial estate to a young woman with no other immediate family is a beacon. To people like them, it's a siren's call. People like them. The phrase should have felt cruel. It felt like truth. A truth I'd felt in my 4-year-old bones on that cold school step. You said there was a final care order, a special guardianship, and a fraud conviction. The words felt strange in my mouth. Legal and clinical. Describing the foundation of my life. There was, and there is, He nudged the leather folder closer to me. These are your copies. You should read them. Not today. But when you're ready. Eleanor wanted you to have the full picture. But only when it became necessary. It seems that time is now. I didn't open it. I was afraid of what I'd see inside. The official stamp on my childhood trauma. Tell me. I whispered. Please. Just tell me what they did. Not the legal version. The truth. Sterling leaned back, steepling his fingers. His gaze was direct. Not unkind. But devoid of sugarcoating. Very well. Your parents, Jonathan and Victoria Langdon, have always lived on the edge of other people's money. Charming. Presentable. With expensive tastes and no sustainable means to support them. When you were born, you were, for a time, an accessory. A charming prop. But expensive. Nannies. The right pram. The right nursery school. A memory. Sharp and unbidden, a woman in a white uniform. Smelling of lavender. Not of my mother. Pushing me in a silver pram through a park I didn't recognize. The money, what little there was, largely from a small inheritance of Victoria's, ran out. Jonathan became involved in what he called property development. It was, in reality, a Ponzi scheme targeting elderly investors in Surrey. He was the charming frontman. When it collapsed, he was charged with fraud. He avoided prison by a thread, a suspended sentence, community service. But the reputational damage was total. The debts were enormous. He spoke dispassionately, as if reading from a report. Every word was a hammer blow, constructing a prison of facts around the ghostly figures of my parents. During this time, their neglect of you became systemic. You were left with a series of increasingly unreliable carers, or with Eleanor, for longer and longer periods. The final incident, the one that triggered the court's intervention, occurred when you were 4 years and 3 months old. I knew what was coming. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. They left you at your nursery school in Kensington on a Friday morning. They told the staff Eleanor would collect you. They did not inform Eleanor. They then boarded a flight to Marbella, attempting to leverage a business contact to escape their creditors. The nursery, when you were not collected, called the number they had on file, your home. No answer. They then called the emergency contact. Eleanor. A flash, the bright, cheerful tiles of the nursery hallway. The other children leaving. One by one. The teacher's smile becoming strained. Sitting on a tiny chair. Holding my backpack. The grey light of a London evening through the high windows. Eleanor drove from Cornwall through the night. She collected you. She took you home. And then she hired me. Sterling's mouth was a thin line. She was not a vengeful woman, but she was fiercely protective. She wanted you safe. Permanently. We petitioned the court for an emergency protection order. Then for full residency. We presented evidence, the school records of inconsistent collection, the testimony of neighbors about loud, violent arguments, the police reports from domestic disturbances that had been called in, the financial records showing money spent on luxury items while your nursery fees went unpaid. And, of course, the fact they had physically left the country without ensuring your care. They didn't contest it. The question felt stupid as soon as I asked it. Sterling's lips quirked in a humorless smile. They tried. Initially. From Spain. They claimed it was a misunderstanding. A communication breakdown. But they had no funds for a proper legal fight. And the evidence was overwhelming. Faced with the prospect of returning to England to fight a custody battle they would certainly lose. And potentially facing additional charges for child abandonment. They chose the path of least resistance. They consented to the special guardianship order. It was cleaner for them. It meant no admission of guilt in a criminal court. Just a quiet, legal transfer of responsibility. Eleanor believed they were relieved. It unburdened them of a problem. You. The word, delivered so calmly, was a physical wound. A problem. That's what I had been. An expensive, inconvenient problem they were relieved to be rid of. The last, fragile fantasy I hadn't even known I'd clung to, that maybe, somehow, they'd loved me, that leaving had hurt them, dissolved into dust. The order. Sterling continued. gave Eleanor parental responsibility to the exclusion of all others. It was as close to adoption as possible without severing the biological link. It was permanent. It did not expire when you turned 18. It is, for all legal and practical purposes, the document that made her your mother and them your genetic donors. The fraud conviction is a matter of public record. Eleanor kept a file. She believed in being prepared. The £5,000 in the will. I trailed off. A classic in terrorem clause. As I said, a poison pill. By leaving them a nominal sum, she brought them within the scope of the will's no contest provision. If they challenge the will, they automatically forfeit even that pittance. More importantly, it frames any challenge they make as explicitly greedy. A judge will look very dimly on someone who stands to lose a bequest by suing for a larger one. It's a powerful psychological and legal deterrent. She was remarkably shrewd. A thought occurred to me. Cold and slimy. They said they never gave up their rights. That it was temporary. A lie. Sterling said. His voice granite. Or a willful delusion. The order is explicit. I have the sealed court documents. Their signatures are on the consent forms. They knew exactly what they were doing. The door opened and Mrs. Higgins returned with a tea tray. Her face set in lines of grim determination. She poured a cup, loaded it with sugar, and pressed it into my hands. The heat was scalding. A necessary, painful anchor to the present. I took a sip. The sweetness cloying but somehow steadying. What happens now? I asked, looking at Sterling over the rim of the cup. Now, he said, we assume they will not be deterred. Today was a probing attack. They tested the defenses, found them manned and formidable. They will retreat, regroup, and likely try a different approach. What approach? The emotional, the public, the underhanded. He ticked them off on his fingers. They may try to contact you directly, to plead, to love bomb you, to make you feel guilty. They may go to the press with a sob story about a cruel aunt who alienated their child and a heartless daughter swayed by a manipulative lawyer. They may dig for dirt, however insignificant, to try and challenge Eleanor's mental capacity when she made the will, or to imply I have a conflict of interest. They are cornered animals. Mia. And cornered animals are unpredictable and often dangerous in their desperation. Fear. A cold trickle started in my chest. The press, it's a possibility we prepare for. We have the truth. And the documents to back it. The court orders. The conviction. We have Eleanor's impeccable reputation in Cornwall. We have you, articulate, intelligent, and the undeniable victim in all of this. We would win that battle. But it would be unpleasant. The best defense is to make the cost of attack too high. How? By being proactive. By you being seen to be stable, secure, and well advised. By ensuring any judge, any journalist, who looks at this sees a clear picture, a devoted guardian who provided a loving home, and avaricious opportunists who have appeared like carrion crows the moment she died. His words were harsh, but they matched the brutal clarity I felt. My immediate advice is for you to leave London. Go to Cliff's End. The house is yours. It's a fortress in its way. And it's in a community that loved Eleanor and, by extension, loves you. It is also harder for them to casually drop in on you in Cornwall. Cliff's End. The thought of its solid stone walls, the sound of the sea, the smell of salt and wood smoke, was a physical yearning. A sanctuary. Yes, I said immediately. I want to go home. Good. Sterling took out a sleek black phone. I'll arrange for a car to take you and Mrs. Higgins to Paddington. You can take the train to Truro. And a car from there to St. Moors. I'll also alert the local solicitors in St. Moors who handled the property deeds. They are a good firm. I'll be in touch daily. You are not to engage with your parents if they contact you. You refer them to me. Is that clear, Crystal? The word came out stronger than I felt. Excellent. He stood. A man of action. Mr. Pembroke. Thank you for your patience. I'll take over from here. Mia. I'll walk you out. Asterisk in the plush. Silent confines of the hired car to Paddington. Mrs. Higgins finally let her composure crack. She wept. Quiet. Angry tears into a handkerchief. The nerve of them. The sheer, unadulterated gall. After what they did to you. To that sweet woman. She blew her nose fiercely. He was a wrong UN from the start. That Jonathan. All flash and no substance. And Victoria, she was always led by the nose by him. But to do that to a child, to their own flesh and blood, I stared out at the rainy London streets. The busy people under black umbrellas. The glowing windows of shops selling things that no longer mattered. The folder sat on my lap like a lead weight. I hadn't opened it. I didn't need to yet. Sterling's words had painted the picture in stark, brutal strokes. Did you know? I asked softly. About the fraud. The court case, Mrs. Higgins was quiet for a long moment. Not the particulars. My love. Not the details. But I knew they were bad news. When Miss Eleanor brought you down to Cornwall that first time, for what we all thought was a holiday, you were such a quiet little thing. Big eyes. Not saying a word. Clinging to her like a limpet. She never spoke ill of them. Not in front of you. But I heard her on the telephone sometimes. To the solicitors. To the bank. Her voice, it could be that cold. I knew it was serious. And then the time stretched on. And your things started arriving. And your little room became your room. We all knew you were staying. And we were all glad of it. Her words were a different kind of truth. Not the legal truth in the folder. But the human truth. A community that had accepted me. A home that had been made for me. Will they come? I asked. The fear finding its voice. To Cornwall, Mrs. Higgins's face set into the stubborn, flinty expression I knew so well. Let them try. She said. And it sounded like a vow. Just let them try. The journey west was a blur of grey fields and tunneled darkness. The rhythmic clatter of the train was soothing. I finally opened the folder. The top document was the final care order. Dated. Stamped. Dense with legal jargon. But the essence was clear. The court is satisfied that the child Mia Langdon is suffering. Or is likely to suffer. Significant harm due to the care given to her not being what it would be reasonable to expect a parent to give. Parental responsibility is vested in Eleanor Margaret Langdon. There were witness statements. From my nursery school teacher. From a neighbor who described hearing frightening shouting and a child crying for hours. A report from a social worker. It was a clinical dissection of my early childhood. And it was horrifying. Beneath it was the record of R.V. Jonathan Langdon. Fraudulent trading. A list of names. Elderly people. Their savings gone. A suspended sentence of 12 months. 200 hours of community service. I closed the folder. My stomach churning. This was the bedrock of my life. Not bedtime stories and lullabies. But court orders and criminal convictions. The love that had built upon that broken foundation, Eleanor's love, felt all the more miraculous. And all the more precious. My phone buzzed. An unknown London number. A text message. Mia. It's Mum. Please. We need to talk. Not about the money. About us. About our family. What that lawyer said, it's not the whole story. We made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we love you. We're your parents. Please give us a chance to explain. Let's meet for coffee. No lawyers. Just us. The casual the mum. The blatant lie after the exposed truth. A hot surge of nausea rose in my throat. I showed the phone to Mrs. Higgins. She scowled. Don't you dare answer that. Mia Langdon. Not a word. You tell your Mr. Sterling. I typed a reply. My fingers cold and stiff. All communication is to go through Richard Sterling of Sterling and Vaughan. Do not contact me again. I blocked the number. The act felt both terrifying and empowering. I was drawing a line. Using the wall Eleanor and Sterling had built. The light was fading to a deep Cornish grey when the car finally wound its way down the familiar lane. The air, sharp with salt and the scent of damp earth and gorse, was the first real breath I'd taken all day. And then there it was, Cliff's End. Not a mansion, but a solid, stone-built house from the Edwardian era. Perched stubbornly on the headland as if growing from the rock itself. Its windows, mullioned and wide, gazed perpetually out to sea. A light was on in the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins must have called ahead to the village girl who helped out. Smoke curled from one of the 3 chimneys. It was warmth. It was safety. It was home in a way the elegant London flat Eleanor had kept for business never was. The driver helped with our bags. The front door, painted the same deep Cornish blue, swung open, and the familiar smell of beeswax, wood smoke, and old books washed over me. It was the smell of Eleanor. For a moment, the grief hit me afresh, a tidal wave that stole my breath. She should be here, standing in the doorway, arms open, saying, "There's my girl." But she wasn't, and I had to walk in alone. Mrs. Higgins took charge, bustling, turning on lights, putting the kettle on. I walked through the familiar rooms, the drawing room with its well-worn chintz sofas and grand piano Eleanor played beautifully, the library, shelves floor to ceiling, the sunroom filled with geraniums. Her presence was in every book, every seashell on the mantelpiece, the slight dip in the floorboard by the window where she always stood to watch storms. I ended up in the kitchen, the heart of the house. A huge ugger radiated warmth. Mrs. Higgins placed a mug of tea in front of me. "I'll get the room sorted. You sit. Breathe." I was trying to breathe. But the events of the day kept crashing over me. The shock of the will. The visceral horror of my parents' appearance. Sterling's calm, devastating defense. The contents of the folder. The text message. My phone rang. A different unknown number. A London code. My heart slammed against my ribs. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up. Voicemail received. I shouldn't listen. Sterling said not to engage. But a morbid, painful curiosity gripped me. I put the phone on the table. Hit speaker. My father's voice filled the warm kitchen. It wasn't the blustering, performative voice from the solicitor's office. It was lower, intimate, dripping with a wounded sincerity that was somehow worse. "Mia. Sweetheart. It's Dad. Please pick up. Please. Look, today was a disaster. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding. That lawyer. Sterling, he's poisoned your mind. He's poisoned everything. He's twisting the past to suit Eleanor's narrative. She was a bitter, lonely woman. Mia. She stole you from us. We were young. We were in trouble. And she used it to take you away. We've been fighting to get you back ever since. Fighting through the courts. Through the system. But she had money. And connections. We never abandoned you. We never would. You have to believe that. We love you. You're our daughter. This money, it's not about the money. It's about finally being a family again. It's about us protecting you from vultures like Sterling who just want a percentage of your inheritance. Please, Mia, call me back. Let's talk. Just us. As a family." The message ended. The silence that followed was more suffocating than before. She was a bitter, lonely woman. She stole you. We've been fighting to get you back ever since. Lies. Palpable. Vicious. Calculating lies. They were rewriting history live. Painting themselves as tragic heroes and Eleanor as the villain. And the worst part. A tiny, shattered piece of the 4-year-old girl still inside me wanted to believe it. Wanted the story where she was wanted. Fought for. Loved. Lies. I said aloud. My voice trembling with fury. Every word. Filthy. Stinking lies. I was shaking. I deleted the voicemail. Blocked the second number. Then I picked up the phone and called Richard Sterling. He answered on the second ring. "Mia. Are you at the house?" "Yes." They called. My father left a voicemail. My voice broke. I repeated the message, verbatim as best I could. There was a short, sharp silence on the other end. When Sterling spoke, his voice was like chilled steel. Good. It's evidence. Mia. It's a recorded attempt to manipulate you. To disparage Eleanor. And to interfere with the execution of the will. It shows their hand. The kindly, misunderstood parents' act is already falling away, revealing the manipulators beneath. Save that number. Do not answer. But if they leave more messages, save them all. This is how they operate. They will try love, then guilt, then fear, then intimidation. Document everything. He said you were just after a percentage. A dry, humorless chuckle. My fees are fixed, and were agreed with Eleanor a decade ago. A matter of public record in the probate filing. Another easily disproven lie. They're not clever, Mia. They're desperate and predictable. Are you all right? Was I? I was in my safe place, hearing my father's voice spin poisonous fantasies. I had a fortune and felt bankrupt. I had won the day and felt besieged. I will be, I said, and tried to make it true. Get some rest. The next move is theirs. We'll be ready. Good night, Mia. Good night, Mr. Sterling. Richard, he said. Call me Richard. I hung up. I walked to the sunroom. The one with the vast windows looking over the bay. The last of the light was dying. The sea a vast, dark murmuring presence. Somewhere out there, on a train or in a cheap hotel room, were Jonathan and Victoria Langdon. They were planning their next move. Their anger had been real. Their greed was a tangible force. They wouldn't just go away. Sterling was right. The battle in the oak-paneled room was just the opening skirmish. The real war was coming here. To my sanctuary. I wrapped my arms around myself, staring into the gathering dark. The house, solid and enduring around me, seemed to sigh in the wind. It had sheltered me once. It would have to shelter me again. But this time, I wasn't a scared 4-year-old. I was a 20-year-old woman with a fortress, a formidable lawyer, and the fierce, posthumous love of a mother who had seen the storm coming. Let them try, I whispered to the night, echoing Mrs. Higgins's vow. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning around the stone corners. The sea whispered against the cliffs. The storm wasn't on the horizon anymore. It was here. The first 2 days at Cliff's End passed in a kind of suspended animation. The shock of the reading, the confrontation, the journey west, it all settled into a heavy, quiet ache. The house, usually a place of vibrant memory, felt like a museum dedicated to a lost era. Eleanor's absence was a physical presence in every room, her gardening hat hanging by the back door, the half-finished novel on her bedside table, the specific lavender scent of her linen cupboard. I moved through the familiar spaces like a ghost, touching things, picking them up, putting them down. The silence was profound, broken only by the ceaseless chorus of the sea and the wind, and Mrs. Higgins's determined, comforting bustle. She had insisted on staying. You're not to be alone. Not now, she'd said, and her tone brooked no argument. I was grateful. The immensity of the house, the weight of the inheritance, the looming threat of my parents, it was too much to face in solitude. Mrs. Higgins cooked simple, hearty meals, fish pie, stew, thick slices of toast with honey from a local farm. She cleaned rooms that were already spotless. She talked, a steady stream of reminiscence about Eleanor that made me laugh through my tears. Remember the time she tried to repaint the dinghy herself and ended up capsizing it in the cove? Blue as a smurf for a week. It was a lifeline. Richard Sterling, Richard, checked in by phone each morning. His voice a calm, steadying influence in the crisp Cornish air. No further contact from my parents. The blocked numbers yielded no more voicemails. The tabloids, which I scanned online with a sick fascination, were silent. It felt, briefly, like the storm had blown itself out. A part of me, the weary, wounded part, wanted to believe it, that the shock of Sterling's legal broadside had been enough, that the sight of the fortress walls had made the besiegers retreat. On the morning of the third day, a fragile peace settled over me. The sun broke through the perpetual grey cloud cover, casting dazzling, shifting diamonds on the sea. The gorse on the headland blazed yellow, and the air smelled of salt and wet earth. I decided to be productive, to do something that felt normal. I pulled on my wellies and an old wax jacket of Eleanor's that still held a trace of her perfume, and went to tackle the overgrown patch of garden she'd called her productive wilderness. The physical labor, pulling weeds, turning the cold, dark soil, was a relief. It anchored me in my body, in the simple, honest present of sun on my back and dirt under my nails. I was kneeling by a stubborn clump of dock leaves, wrestling with its deep taproot, when I felt it, a prickle on the back of my neck. Not the wind, a presence. I looked up, shading my eyes against the low sun. They were standing on the other side of the low stone wall that marked the boundary between the wild garden and the coastal path. Jonathan and Victoria Langdon. They looked absurdly out of place. Jonathan wore tailored trousers and a navy blazer over a cashmere jumper, as if for a weekend in the Cotswolds. Victoria was in a stylish, knee-length trench coat, her hair perfectly blown in the sea breeze. They were both smiling, but the smiles didn't reach their eyes. In Jonathan's hand was a tasteful wicker basket. It was a parody of a friendly visit. My heart stopped, then began to pound a frantic, sickening rhythm against my ribs. The trowel fell from my numb fingers into the dirt. Mia, darling. Victoria's voice carried on the wind, high and artificially bright. There you are. We've been knocking at the front door. We thought you must be out. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. I didn't move from my spot. The 20 feet of garden between us felt like a mile, and also like no distance at all. What are you doing here? My voice sounded flat. Dead. We've come to see you. Of course, Jonathan said, his tone one of gentle, paternal reproof. To talk properly, away from all those lawyers and stuffy offices. He hefted the basket. We've even brought a peace offering. Your mother remembered you loved those iced buns from that bakery in, what was it? Victoria? Marlborough, the casual rewriting of history, the insertion of a shared, fictional past, was breathtaking. I'd never been to Marlborough with them. I had no memory of iced buns. It was a script, and they were performing it with sickening sincerity. I have nothing to say to you, I said, forcing the words out. You need to leave. Now. Victoria's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wounded sadness. Oh, Mia, please, don't be like that. We're your parents. We've made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. We know that. But can't we at least talk? We've come all this way. She took a step forward, as if to unlatch the little wooden gate in the wall. Don't, I said, the word sharp as a gunshot. Don't come in here. This is private property. Jonathan's smile finally faded, revealing the hard calculation beneath. He rested a hand on the gate, not opening it, but claiming it. Mia, this is childish. We're not here to fight. We're here to mend bridges. What that lawyer said, it was a version of events. Yes, a very one-sided, legalistic version. Life is more complicated than court documents. Families are more complicated. We weren't a family. I spat, the anger thawing my frozen fear. You left. You signed papers. You went away for 16 years. That's not complicated. That's simple. It's abandonment. It's a fact. Victoria flinched as if struck. You have to understand. We were so young. We were in over our heads. We thought it was best. That you'd be better off with Eleanor. She was so stable. So settled. We were a mess. It was the most unselfish thing we've ever done. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. It was a masterful performance. Unselfish. A harsh laugh escaped me. Leaving a 4-year-old and never looking back is unselfish. Is that what you tell yourselves at night? It must be a great comfort. Jonathan's jaw tightened. The paternal act was slipping. We're not here to relitigate the past. Mia, what's done is done. We're here for the future. Your future. You're a young woman, suddenly in possession of a great deal of wealth and property. It's a target on your back. That lawyer. Sterling, do you really know who he is? What his motivations are? He gets a percentage. Mia. A fat percentage of everything you have. He's not your friend. He's a hired gun Eleanor set against us. And now he's turning that gun on you. Filling your head with poison to keep control of the money. It was the voicemail argument, polished and delivered in person. The shift was subtle, from we love you to you're in danger. It was designed to seed doubt, to isolate me. I know exactly who he is, I said, my voice low and steady. He's the man who has the court orders that prove you're liars. He's the one following my aunt's instructions. Instructions designed to protect me. From you. From us. Jonathan's voice rose, losing its cultivated calm. We're your family. Blood. He's a stranger in a suit. Open your eyes. Girl. Eleanor was a bitter, lonely spinster who stole you to fill a hole in her own empty life. She twisted you against us from the start. And now she's left you alone, ripe for the picking by men like Sterling. We're trying to save you from that. Rage, white hot and pure, flashed through me. I took a step forward, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. Don't you dare say her name. Don't you dare. She was 10 times the parent, 10 times the person either of you could ever hope to be. She loved me. She wanted me. You threw me away. The only thing I'm ripe for is seeing the back of you. The mask shattered completely. Jonathan's face darkened with a fury so potent it was almost thrilling in its honesty. The charming father was gone, replaced by the ruthless man from the solicitor's office. From the fraud conviction. You stupid, naive little bitch. He snarled, the veneer of civility gone. Do you think your precious aunt was a saint? Do you know why she really took you in? Guilt. Pure. Simple guilt. I froze. What are you talking about? He saw he had my attention and pressed the advantage. A cruel smirk touching his lips. She felt responsible. For her poor, wayward sister. For the family disappointment. Taking you as her penance. A charity case to make her feel better about her own perfect, lonely life. You were never a daughter to her. You were a project. A pathetic little project to alleviate her bourgeois guilt. The words were meant to wound, to undermine the very foundation of my world. And they did. For a second. A sliver of icy doubt. But then I looked at the basket in his hand. At his expensive shoes sullied by the muddy path. At the naked greed in his eyes. And I saw the truth. This was the last, desperate weapon of a man with no real ammunition. Get out, I said, my voice trembling not with fear, but with a fury that matched his own. Get off my property. Now. Or what? Jonathan sneered. You'll call your lawyer. Go ahead. We're not on your property. We're on a public footpath. We're concerned parents trying to talk to our estranged daughter. What judge in the land would fault us for that? He leaned on the gate. This isn't over. Mia. You can hide behind your lawyers and your trust funds. But the world has a way of finding out the truth. How do you think it will look? The heartless heiress, hoarding her millions in her seaside mansion, while her destitute, heartbroken parents are shut out in the cold. The court of public opinion, my dear, is not as easily bought as a probate judge. It was a threat. A clear, ugly threat to go to the press. Victoria, seeing the escalation, tried to dial it back. Her voice a placating warble. Jonathan, please, don't. Mia, darling. He doesn't mean it. He's upset. We're all upset. We just want to be part of your life. The money, it's not for us. It's for you. We want to help you manage it. To guide you. To protect you from making terrible mistakes. We're your parents. She stretched out a hand imploringly across the wall. Her fingers with their perfect manicure looking like talons. The back door of the house slammed. Mrs. Higgins appeared on the stone step. Her arms crossed over her floral apron. Her face like thunder. You heard her. She called out. Her Cornish accent thick and commanding. You're not welcome here. Be on your way. Jonathan turned his glare on her. This is a private family matter. You interfering old busybody. Stay out of it. This is my home. Mrs. Higgins shot back. Not moving an inch. And that girl is my family. More than you'll ever be. Now. I've already rung for the community warden. He's a friend. He doesn't take kindly to folks harassing residents. Especially not so soon after a bereavement. He'll be up that lane in 2 minutes. I reckon the local paper might be interested in a story. 2. London couple loiter. Distress heiress has a nice ring to it. Don't you think? It was a bluff. A magnificent bluff. Delivered with such solid conviction that even I almost believed her. Jonathan's eyes darted past her. Up the lane. The threat of local authority. of a small community closing ranks, was a different kind of calculus. He couldn't bully or charm a Cornish community warden the way he might a London solicitor. His face worked. The fury battling with cold pragmatism. The public path was one thing, the police or a local official was another. He took a step back from the gate. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice low and venomous, directed solely at me. "You think you've won? You've got a house and a bank account. You're a child playing at being an adult. We're not going anywhere. The law might be on your side for now, but the world loves a sob story. And we've got a very good one. A daughter, brainwashed by a dead aunt and a greedy lawyer, turning her back on her poor, loving parents. It'll play beautifully." He took Victoria's arm, his grip vicious. "Come on. We're not welcome here. Yet." He shot me one last, searing look of pure hatred, then turned, dragging a now weeping Victoria, whether from real upset or performance, I couldn't tell, back up the coastal path towards the village. I stood rooted to the spot, shaking violently, the adrenaline crashing through me in nauseating waves. The sun seemed too bright, the birdsong too cheerful. Mrs. Higgins was at my side in moments, her arm around my shoulders. "Inside, my love. Come on. Now. Inside. You're white as a sheet." She led me, unresisting, back into the kitchen, sat me down at the scrubbed pine table, and put the kettle on. The familiar ritual. My hands were caked in dirt, my knees muddy. I looked like a child who'd fallen over. "The community warden," I finally managed, my voice a whisper. A grim, satisfied smile touched her lips. "No, I didn't. But I had the number ready to dial. And old Tom Griffiths down at the boatyard did see them walking this way. He knows everyone and everything that moves in St. Mawes. If they'd stayed another 5 minutes, he'd have been up here with his shotgun, just cleaning it. Like." She placed a steaming mug of tea in front of me. "They're gone for now. But she's right, Mia. They're not finished." That was a declaration of war. That was. I wrapped my hands around the mug, seeking its warmth. The shaking wouldn't stop. He threatened to go to the press, the court of public opinion. "Aye, Mrs. Higgins said, sitting heavily opposite me. "They're that type. Can't win fair. So they'll cheat. Can't win in law. So they'll try lies and sympathy." She studied my face. "What did he say about Miss Eleanor?" "About guilt," I repeated it, the vile words tasting like ash in my mouth. Mrs. Higgins's face flushed with anger. "Rubbish. Pure, unadulterated rubbish. That woman loved you from the moment she set eyes on you. It was the making of her. Having you brought the light right back into her life. You did. Don't you listen to a word of his poison. He's a snake." I knew she was right. I knew it. But the seed, tiny and poisonous, had been planted. A project. A charity case. I pushed the thought away violently. I had a lifetime of evidence to the contrary. A lifetime of bedtime stories. Of held hands during thunderstorms. Of patient help with homework. Of fierce, unwavering pride at every school play. Every exam result. That was truth. Jonathan's words were a weapon. Nothing more. But a weapon could still draw blood. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were still unsteady. But I navigated to Richard's number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting the call. "Mia. What's happened?" They were here. The words tumbled out. I told him everything, the sudden appearance, the basket, the pleas, the rapid shift to threats, Jonathan's words about Eleanor, the explicit threat to go to the press. I repeated the phrase, court of public opinion, verbatim. There was a long silence on the other end. When Richard spoke, his voice was like chilled granite. "I see. Are you all right?" "Shaken. Angry. Good. Anger is useful. Fear is not. They've shown their next move. Emotional blackmail failed. So they're escalating to reputational warfare. It's a common tactic. Slightly more sophisticated than I gave them credit for. What do I do? First, you do exactly what you did. You do not engage. You tell them to leave. You have witnesses, Mrs. Higgins. And you mentioned a neighbor, Tom Griffiths. He saw them. Good. That's 2 witnesses to their presence and their attempt to approach you after being told, via me, to cease contact. It builds a pattern of harassment. I will immediately apply for a non-molestation order. Their presence today, combined with the voicemail, gives us strong grounds. It won't stop them speaking to the press, but it will make any direct contact a criminal offense. It's a stronger legal line in the sand. And the press? What if they do go to a newspaper, then we respond? He said, his tone utterly certain. We have the truth. We have the documents. We have you, a credible, intelligent young woman who is the undeniable victim of long-term abandonment. We also have their criminal records. If they choose to fight this battle in the tabloids, Mia, they will lose. But it will be unpleasant for you. The best defense is to make the cost of that path prohibitive for them. The non-molestation order is part of that. A public lawsuit for defamation, if they tell lies about Eleanor or you, would be another. They have no money for a protracted legal fight. We must make that abundantly clear to them. How? Through their solicitor. If they're sensible enough to hire one, I will draft a letter detailing today's incident, referencing the previous attempts at contact, and stating in unequivocal terms that any further contact, or any attempt to disseminate false or defamatory information to the media about you, Eleanor, or the administration of the estate, will result in immediate legal action for harassment, defamation, and a claim for costs. I will send it to their last known address. Sometimes, the clearest way to stop a bully is to demonstrate that you are prepared to hit back, harder and with better resources. His calm, strategic ruthlessness was a tonic. He wasn't just building a wall, he was planning a counterattack. You think that will work? It will raise the stakes. Right now, they think they're dealing with a grieving, vulnerable girl. They need to understand they're dealing with a determined, well-defended young woman and a legal team that will not hesitate to use every tool at its disposal. It may not stop them, but it will force them to think very, very carefully about their next move. In the meantime, Mia, you must live your life, but be cautious. Do not answer the door to strangers. Keep your phone charged. Consider installing a simple security system at Cliff's End, cameras at the gates, that sort of thing. I can recommend a firm. The idea of turning my sanctuary into a fortress was sickening, but the sight of Jonathan leaning on my garden gate was more sickening. Okay, I said quietly. Do it. I will. Now, try to put it out of your mind for tonight. You're safe. The house is solid. The community is around you. Remember that. We said goodbye. I put the phone down and looked at Mrs. Higgins. He's applying for an order to keep them away. And he's going to send them a letter warning them off. She nodded. Satisfied. Good. Nasty creatures need a firm hand. She got up and went to the larder. I'm making a bread and butter pudding. Miss Eleanor's favorite. You'll have a proper supper. I looked out the kitchen window. The sun was dipping towards the sea, setting the water on fire. The beauty of it was a stark contrast to the ugliness that had just transpired on the other side of the wall. Jonathan was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The battle lines were no longer in a London office. They were here, at the edge of the sea. In my home. The siege had begun. But I wasn't a helpless child anymore. I had walls. I had allies. And for the first time, staring out at the burning water, I felt a spark of something besides fear and anger. I felt a cold, determined resolve. They wanted a war, they would get one. The non-molestation order arrived by courier 2 days later. A crisp, official document that felt both flimsy and powerful. It forbade Jonathan or Victoria Langdon from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming within 100 meters of Cliff's End, or from instructing any third party to do so. A copy, Richard informed me, had been served to their last known address, a rented flat in Kensington. The accompanying letter from Sterling and Vaughan was, in Richard's words, uncompromising. It detailed the incidents at the solicitor's office and at the garden wall, cited the fraud conviction, and stated that any further action, including approaching the media with defamatory stories, would be met with immediate and costly legal retaliation for harassment and libel. For a week, the silence held. It was a tense, watchful quiet, broken only by the rhythmic solace of the sea and the comforting routines Mrs. Higgins enforced. I started sleeping in the main bedroom, Eleanor's room. It felt strange at first, a trespass, but the old four-poster bed was solid, and the windows offered a 180-degree view of the bay, making me feel less like a trapped animal. I took long, brisk walks along the coastal path, always with my phone charged and a can of personal alarm Richard had sent in my pocket. The community, as Mrs. Higgins had predicted, closed ranks with quiet and showy efficiency. Tom Griffiths, a grizzled former fisherman with a face like weathered oak, would accidentally be mending his nets near the start of the path to my house. Miss Penhaligon, who ran the tiny post office, would ask after me with a knowing look. It was a network of silent sentinels. I began, tentatively, to look forward. I logged into my Cambridge portal, downloaded reading lists for the next term. I even dared to look at the trust documents Richard sent over, not the sums, which still made me dizzy, but the investment structure. It was overwhelmingly conservative, focused on long-term growth and income. Eleanor's instructions: capital preservation first, growth second. Richard had noted, boring is safe. Safe. It was what she'd always wanted for me. The fragile sense of control shattered on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Higgins had gone into the village for groceries. I was at the kitchen table, a pot of tea at my elbow, trying to focus on an article about the Cornish tin mining riots of 1842. My phone buzzed with a notification from a news aggregator app, one rarely used. The headline, amidst the political chaos and celebrity gossip, screamed at me: heiress in a cold house. Heartbreak of abandoned parents as daughter shuts them out of multi-million-pound Cornish legacy. My stomach dropped through the floor. I tapped the link with a numb finger. It was from the Daily Courier, a mid-market tabloid known for its sentimental, often ruthless, human interest stories. The byline was one Simon Fry. The article was a masterpiece of skewed narrative. It opened with a heart-rending quote from a distraught Victoria Langdon: "We just want to hug our little girl again. We made mistakes. Yes. But what parent hasn't? We've had 16 years of empty chairs at Christmas. And now, just as we dared to hope for reconciliation, we're being shut out with legal threats. It's like losing her all over again." It painted a picture of a tragic misunderstanding that led to a temporary separation, of parents who had struggled with personal demons but had never stopped loving their daughter. Eleanor was mentioned as a well-meaning but domineering spinster aunt who took advantage of a family crisis to effectively steal the child, alienating her from her natural parents. My inheritance was described in lurid detail: the clifftop mansion, the fortune in excess of £2 million. Richard Sterling was the high-powered, aggressive lawyer who was orchestrating the estrangement, perhaps to maintain control over the lucrative trust fund. The piece was carefully constructed. It never outright stated that Eleanor had acted illegally, or that Richard was corrupt. It used qualifiers: allegedly. It is claimed. Sources suggest. It was innuendo masquerading as journalism. The comments section was already a swamp. Disgusting. Money corrupts. Poor parents. That lawyer should be struck off. Another spoiled rich kid. A few voices of reason were shouted down. I sat there, trembling, a cold fury rising to replace the initial shock. They'd done it. They'd gone to the press. And they'd done it with a sickening, manipulative skill. My phone rang. Richard. I swiped to answer. My voice a tight wire. You've seen it. I have. I've already had 3 calls from other outlets asking for comment. It's got out on the wire. What do we do? First, you do not react online. Do not post. Do not comment. Do not even look at the comments. Second, we issue a statement. A short, factual, legally vetted statement that pulls no punches. We are not playing their game of emotional manipulation. We are dealing in facts. What facts? They've twisted everything. We have the immutable facts. Mia. The court orders. The conviction. We release them. We don't argue. We demonstrate. I'm drafting the statement now. It will go to the Press Association and every outlet that has called, including the Courier. It will state that you are the victim of a long-term childhood abandonment, legally documented, that your parents have a criminal conviction for fraud, that their recent reappearance coincides precisely with your inheritance, and that their claims are a malicious fiction designed to exert pressure for financial gain. It will note that legal proceedings for harassment are underway. It will be brutal. And it will be true. The ruthlessness of it was breathtaking. It was a nuclear option. Going public with the conviction. With the care order. It would eviscerate their loving parents' image. Will it work? It will change the narrative. The story will no longer be poor parents versus cold heiress. It will be convicted fraudsters try to guilt-trip estranged daughter out of inheritance. The British public has a limited tolerance for sentimentality when faced with hard evidence of criminality and greed. But Mia, you need to understand, this will make it all public. Your private pain, the details of your childhood, will be in the open. There is no way to fight this battle cleanly and stay private. You must decide if you're prepared for that. I thought of the article, the smears against Eleanor, the lies, the image of them playing the victims. The thought of that narrative standing unchallenged, taking root, was worse than any exposure. Do it, I said, my voice firmer now. Release it all. I'm not hiding. They started this. Good. I could hear the faint tap of keys in the background. I'll have it to you for approval within the hour. In the meantime, brace yourself. The phone may ring. Do not answer any number you don't recognize. I'll handle all media. True to his word. An email arrived 50 minutes later. The statement was a model of cold precision. It was 3 paragraphs of devastating fact. Devoid of emotion. It named names. Cited case numbers. Listed the charge against Jonathan. It ended with, Miss Langdon wishes only to be left in peace to grieve for the woman who was, in every meaningful sense, her mother. She will be pursuing all available legal avenues to protect herself from this campaign of harassment and defamation. I read it 3 times. It felt like unleashing a beast. I approve. I typed back. Send it. The response was almost immediate. Within 2 hours, online versions of the story were being updated with the bland journalistic caveat, Mr. Sterling's firm has issued a statement denying these claims and alleging a history of abandonment and fraud. We have put these allegations to Mr. and Mrs. Langdon and are awaiting response. The comments sections became battlegrounds. The narrative was fracturing. Fraud? Hang on. See? I knew there was more to it. Sounds like the parents are chancers. But the victory, if it was won, felt Pyrrhic. I felt exposed. Raw. The story was out there. My life dissected for public consumption. I spent the day in a state of hyper-alert anxiety, jumping at every creak of the old house. Mrs. Higgins returned, having heard the news in the village shop. Her face like a thundercloud. Vipers, she muttered, slamming cupboard doors as she made tea. Dirty, lying vipers. The second blow fell that evening. A small, anonymous parcel, the type used for online book returns, was found on the front step. Mrs. Higgins brought it in. Her expression wary. It was addressed simply to M. Langdon, Cliff's End. No postmark. No return address. It had been hand-delivered. Don't open it, Mrs. Higgins said. But it was too late. A terrible certainty had settled over me. I took the parcel to the kitchen table. Used a pair of scissors to slice the tape. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was a simple wooden frame. And in the frame was a photograph. A family portrait. Jonathan. Young. Handsome. Smiling broadly. Victoria. Radiant. Her hair in a stylish bob. And between them, a little girl of about 3. Me. I was wearing a frilly dress. My hair in bunches. Grinning at the camera with a gap-toothed, innocent smile. I had no memory of the photo being taken. But it was undeniably us. The happy, perfect family. There was no note. Just the photograph. The message was clearer than any words. This is what you're destroying. This is the family you're denying. This is the love you're throwing away. It was a weapon aimed directly at the heart, designed to bypass logic and legal argument and strike at the core of a child's longing. But it was also a threat. The implicit second part: imagine this photo in the newspapers. Imagine the headline: the little girl they say doesn't want them. Imagine the story we could tell with this. I shoved the frame away as if it were radioactive. The cheerful, frozen image felt obscene. They are monsters, I whispered. Psychological monsters. Mrs. Higgins picked up the frame. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Where did they get this? They must have kept it. As a prop. The word tasted foul. My childhood. Reduced to a prop in a blackmail scheme. I called Richard again. It was getting to be a habit. I described the parcel. The photo. This time. The silence on the other end was longer. Heavier. That, he said finally, his voice tight with a cold anger I hadn't heard before, is unambiguous intimidation. A deliberate attempt to cause you psychological distress. It moves this from harassment into the realm of potentially criminal threatening behavior. We need to involve the police. Now. The police. What can they do? It's just a photo. There's no threat written down. The threat is implicit in the context. Delivering an unsolicited item to the home of someone you are legally forbidden to contact. Following a vicious media campaign you initiated, with the clear intent to cause alarm or distress. A good officer will see it for what it is. We need to start a paper trail with the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary. It strengthens our hand immeasurably. It also sends a message to them: we are not messing about. This is now a potential criminal matter. The world tilted again. Solicitors. Court orders. Press statements. That was one universe. The police was another. It made it all terrifyingly real. Okay. I said. My voice small. I'll call the local station in St. Moors. I know the sergeant there. I'll ask for an officer to come and take a statement from you and Mrs. Higgins. And collect the parcel and frame for fingerprints. Do not touch it again. The next 2 hours passed in a surreal daze. A young, serious-looking PC and a WPC arrived, were offered tea by a grimly polite Mrs. Higgins, and took careful statements. They bagged the parcel and the frame with gloved hands. They asked if I felt unsafe. I said I didn't know. They advised increased vigilance and promised to have a word with the local patrols. It was both reassuring and utterly terrifying. After they left, the house felt different. Violated. The sanctuary had been breached. Not by bodies, but by a poisonous idea and a frozen slice of false nostalgia. Richard called back as dusk was falling. The police report is logged. That's on record now. It changes the dynamic. Now, Mia, we need to talk about our next move. We've been reacting, defending. It's time to consider a more proactive strategy. Proactive? How? An interview. I balked. With the press. After that, I gestured to my laptop, where the Courier article was still open. Not with the Courier. Not with any tabloid. With a serious, credible broadsheet. The Guardian. Or the Telegraph. A features editor I know at The Guardian has already reached out. Off the back of our statement. She's interested in the story behind the story. Not the salacious details, but the legal and emotional anatomy of a case like this. The manipulation. The use of media. The impact on the victim. It would be a long-form piece. Carefully negotiated. With copy approval. You would tell your story. In your words. On your terms. We would control the narrative completely. The thought made me feel sick. To sit across from a journalist. To lay bare the abandonment. The love for Eleanor. The horror of the last few weeks. I can't. Think about it. He urged. His voice calm but insistent. Right now. You are a silhouette in their story. The cold heiress. The brainwashed daughter. If you remain silent, that is the image that will solidify. By speaking, with the right platform, you become a person. A sympathetic, wronged young woman. You reclaim your own history. You honor Eleanor by telling the truth about her. You expose their tactics for what they are. It is the single most powerful thing you can do to defang them. And if I say the wrong thing, That's what I'm for. We would prepare exhaustively. We would agree on every topic, every line of questioning. You would have the right to review and amend the final piece. It would not be an ambush. It would be a strategic deployment of truth. I looked out at the darkening sea. Silent. Defending. It was exhausting. It left me feeling powerless. A target. The idea of doing something, of fighting back with my own voice, was terrifying but also, in a deep, visceral way, compelling. I'd have to talk about Eleanor, about what she meant to me. Yes. And about being left. At school. If you choose to. You set the boundaries. Mia. It's your story. I thought of the framed photo. Currently in an evidence bag. A silent, smiling lie. My story was not that photo. My story was the cold school step. And the long drive through the night. And the warm, solid arms that finally lifted me up. My story was Cliff's End. And love that didn't need a legal clause to be real. I took a deep, shuddering breath. Okay. Set up the meeting. But, you're there. The whole time. Of course. Every second. I'll contact the features editor first thing tomorrow. After hanging up, I felt a strange, shaky sense of resolve. The fear was still there. A cold knot in my stomach. But alongside it was something new, a steely determination. They had sent their lies into the world. They had sent a ghost from my past to haunt me. It was time to send something back. I went to the library, to Eleanor's favorite writing desk. I took out a fresh sheet of paper and a pen. Not to write for the interview. Not yet. But to write for myself. To anchor myself in the truth before I had to speak it aloud. Dear Eleanor. I wrote. The pen scraping in the quiet room. They're using the past as a weapon. But you gave me the present. And you've armed me for the future. I'm scared. But I'm going to fight. I'm going to tell them about the mother I had. I hope I do you justice. I folded the paper and tucked it into the pages of the book she'd been reading, A History of Cornish Shipwrecks. It felt like a vow. Down in London. In a dimly lit wine bar off Fleet Street. A different conversation was taking place. Jonathan Langdon was sliding an envelope across a sticky table to a thin, sharp-faced man in his 40s with restless eyes. The man's name was David Ross, and he described himself as a reputation consultant, formerly a tabloid journalist. The statement from Sterling was potent. Ross said, sipping a large gin. The fraud conviction. Nasty. Plays badly. The poor parents' angle is on life support. We're paying you to resuscitate it. Jonathan snapped. His voice low. Victoria sat beside him, sipping mineral water, her eyes darting around the bar. Oh, it can be done, Ross said, a sly smile playing on his lips. The conviction is old news. We reframe it. A youthful error. Long paid for. The abandonment claims. We muddy the waters. A complex family situation exploited by a manipulative relative. The girl is key. She's vulnerable. Grieving. Under the thumb of a control freak lawyer. We need to undermine him. Suggest conflicts of interest. Question his fees. Hint that he's perhaps over-involved with his young client. Nothing explicit. Of course. Whispers. Innuendo. Enough to make a newspaper lawyer blanch. But enough to plant a seed in the reader's mind. Jonathan's eyes gleamed in the low light. Can you do that? I have friends. Ross said, pocketing the envelope. The photo was a nice touch. Sentimental. Primal. We need more of that. Do you have anything else? Letters. Anything that suggests the aunt was unstable. Or that the lawyer is pressuring her. Victoria spoke up. Her voice barely a whisper. There's the question of the will itself. Eleanor was getting on. She was suggestible. Especially where Mia was concerned. And that Sterling. He's been her lawyer for years. He had her ear. Who's to say he didn't influence the terms? Ross's smile widened. Now that is interesting. Challenging testamentary capacity. It's a nuclear option. And it rarely works. But the threat of it, the cloud of it, can be useful. It makes the whole inheritance look tainted. It turns the heiress from a victim into a potential beneficiary of undue influence. A much less sympathetic figure. He finished his gin. Leave it with me. I'll have a chat with a features editor I know at the Courier. A different angle. More forensic. Less sentimental. We pivot from poor us to something's not right here. He stood up. Keep your phones on. And for God's sake, stay away from Cornwall. You're on the back foot. Let me do the talking. He melted into the evening crowd. Jonathan watched him go. Then signaled for another bottle of wine. His expensive. He muttered. His our only hope. Victoria replied. Her face pale. We can't let that little bitch and that lawyer win. It's our money. Ours. Jonathan poured a large glass. The ruby liquid catching the ugly bar lights. She'll crack. He said. More to himself than to Victoria. All this legal pressure. The police. The media. She's just a kid. She'll crack. And when she does, we'll be there. The loving parents. Ready to forgive and take the burden away. He took a long drink. She'll crack. Outside, the London night swallowed the street. Indifferent to the plots hatched in its noisy, anonymous heart. 250 miles away. In a stone house on a cliff, a young woman put down her pen. Her own resolve hardening in the quiet dark. The battle lines were no longer just legal or reputational. They were psychological. And the next move, for both sides, was being prepared in silence. The week between agreeing to the interview and the day in court passed in a blur of grim preparation. The meeting with the Guardian features editor, a sharp, empathetic woman named Anya, had taken place over a secure video link with Richard present. It was less an interview and more a negotiation of boundaries. We agreed on the scope, my childhood with Eleanor. The nature of the abandonment, using the court orders as factual anchors. The shock of the reappearance. The media and psychological attacks. We would not discuss the specific value of the trust. And Richard's role would be framed as Eleanor's chosen executor. A safeguard. Anya was interested in the broader themes, how grief is weaponized. How the law protects, or fails, the vulnerable. The psychology of familial coercion. It felt clinical. Strategic. I was to be a case study. But a human one. My story. Not a sob story. The piece was slated for publication a week after the court hearing. A timed counterpunch. But first, the courtroom. The royal courts of justice on the Strand loomed like a Gothic cathedral to the god of disputation. Its vast, vaulted halls and endless corridors of honey-colored stone were meant to awe. And they did. I felt infinitesimally small as Richard. A silhouette of charcoal-grey confidence guided me through the bustling throngs of barristers in wigs and gowns, solicitors with trolleys of files, and anxious-looking families. The air smelled of old paper, floor polish, and a faint, metallic tang of stress. We were in the family division, a wood-paneled courtroom, smaller than the grand criminal courts but no less intimidating. The public gallery was empty. Richard had applied for reporting restrictions given the sensitive nature of the historical care proceedings. The only people present were the essential players, the judge, an elderly, sharp-eyed man with a face like a disappointed hawk, the clerks, a stenographer, and on the other side of the room, Jonathan and Victoria Langdon, flanked by their solicitor and a barrister. Their barrister, a Ms. Pamela Vance, QC, was everything Richard was not. Where he was understated, she was a study in theatrical gravitas. Her wig was perfectly perched. Her gown fell in sharp folds. And she had a voice that could carry to the back of a theatre without seeming to raise it. She exuded a potent, sympathetic authority. Jonathan and Victoria were playing their part perfectly. They were dressed in sober, respectful clothing, Victoria in a navy dress, Jonathan in a dark suit. No tie. They looked pale, drawn. The picture of dignified suffering. Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Jonathan sat stiffly, his hand covering hers on the table in a show of united fortitude. It made my skin crawl. Our barrister, a man named Alistair Croft, Casey, was Richard's strategic choice. Older than Vance, with a rumpled, scholarly air and a reputation for deadly, quiet precision. He didn't perform, he dissected. The hearing was to consider Jonathan and Victoria's application, firstly, for a without notice interim order appointing them as Mia's guardians ad litem, for the purposes of the suit, to protect her interests, secondly, for a formal challenge to the validity of Eleanor's will on grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity, and thirdly, for an order freezing the assets of the estate pending the outcome of their challenge. The judge, Mr. Justice Hargreaves, peered over his half-moon spectacles. Ms. Vance, you have a considerable burden to discharge. This court does not lightly entertain applications that seek to overturn the clear wishes of the deceased, nor to impose guardianship on a competent adult, merely days after a hostile media campaign has been initiated by your clients. Proceed. Vance rose. A smooth, deliberate motion. My lord. Thank you. May I begin by expressing my client's profound regret that matters have come to this. They are here not out of greed, as has been so crudely alleged, but out of a deep, abiding, and, until recently, frustrated parental love. She painted a picture of a young couple overwhelmed by misfortune. The fraud case was a catastrophic business failure for which Jonathan had accepted responsibility, a youthful error that had haunted him. Their separation from Mia was a temporary measure, a heart-wrenching decision made in the belief she would be better cared for by her wealthy, stable aunt. They had, she claimed, always intended to reunite, but were thwarted by Eleanor's increasingly possessive behavior and her systematic alienation of their daughter. They are not forensic accountants, my lord, Vance intoned, her voice throbbing with feeling. They are parents, heartbroken parents who, upon the death of Eleanor Langdon, saw a final chance to heal the rift within their family. Instead, they were met with a wall of legal aggression. They discovered their daughter, a vulnerable young woman in the throes of grief, had been left an immense fortune and was now under the sole influence of Mr. Richard Sterling, a lawyer with a long-standing and, one might suggest, financially rewarding relationship with the deceased. She turned and gestured towards me. I forced myself to meet her gaze, to not look away. Miss Langdon is 20. She is grieving. She has, we submit, been profoundly influenced, first by an aunt who filled her head with negativity towards her parents, and now by a lawyer whose firm stands to gain significantly from the ongoing administration of a multi-million-pound trust. In such circumstances, is it any wonder she is resistant? The question before you, my lord, is not simply one of legal technicality. It is one of welfare. Who is looking out for Mia Langdon's true interests? Not the cold mechanics of a trust designed to exclude her natural family, but her human, emotional, and long-term interests. She then moved to the will. We have concerns, my lord, serious concerns, about the circumstances in which this will was made. Eleanor Langdon was, in her later years, a frail and isolated woman. She was deeply dependent on Mr. Sterling. The will leaves everything to a single beneficiary, cutting out her own sister entirely, save for a derisory, conditional bequest. It appoints Mr. Sterling as executor and trustee, granting him extraordinary power and, of course, entitlement to substantial fees. We submit there is a tribal issue as to whether Miss Langdon truly had the independent capacity to make such a will, or whether she was under the undue influence of the sole beneficiary of her estate. It was clever. She was tying me and Richard together, making us a single, sinister entity, the influenced and the influencer, the vulnerable heiress and her manipulative lawyer. The narrative from the Courier, polished and dressed in legal silk. When she finished, the air in the room felt charged. Jonathan allowed a look of pained righteousness to settle on his face. Victoria's silent tears continued. Mr. Justice Hargreaves made a note. Mr. Croft. Alistair Croft got to his feet slowly, as if unfolding from a deep thought. He adjusted his gown. My lord, he began, his voice a dry, quiet rasp that forced everyone to listen carefully. My learned friend has delivered a compelling performance. A tragedy in 3 acts, the flawed heroes, the wicked witch, and the trapped princess. It is, however, a fiction. And we are not in a theatre, we are in a court of law, where facts, evidence, and documents hold sway over melodrama. He turned to face the judge fully. The application before you is, with respect, an abusive process. It is the latest move in a campaign of harassment that began the moment my client, Mia Langdon, inherited her aunt's estate. A campaign documented in emails, voicemails, a national newspaper article, and the sinister delivery of a photograph to her home, a matter now under investigation by Devon and Cornwall police. Vance shot to her feet. My lord, I must object. The police investigation is irrelevant to these proceedings and highly prejudicial. Sit down. Ms. Vance. The judge said wearily. I'll decide what is relevant. Continue. Mr. Croft. Croft gave a slight nod. The facts are these. 16 years ago, Jonathan and Victoria Langdon abandoned their 4-year-old daughter. Not temporarily. They left the country. They were the subject of a successful application by Eleanor Langdon for a final care order and subsequently a special guardianship order, which vested sole parental responsibility in her. Their consent to that order is on file. They have had no meaningful contact with their daughter since. Jonathan Langdon has a conviction for fraud, for which he received a suspended sentence. These are not youthful errors or business failures. They are the documented actions of individuals who have demonstrated a profound lack of responsibility, both financial and parental. He placed a bundle of documents before the judge, the evidence supporting the grant of those orders. My lord, social worker reports, witness statements from teachers and neighbors, the judgment of the court. It makes for distressing reading, but it is the factual foundation of my client's childhood. The parental love my learned friend speaks of so eloquently is entirely absent from this historical record. He then picked up another file. Now, to the will. Eleanor Langdon was, until the day she died, a woman of formidable intellect and clear intent. Her GP of 30 years, Dr. Anil Sharma, has provided a sworn affidavit stating she was of sound mind, with no diagnosis of any cognitive impairment, and that she discussed her will and her reasons for it with him in detail. Her longtime housekeeper, a Mrs. Agnes Higgins, has provided a statement as to her independence and mental acuity. The will itself was prepared by a reputable firm and executed with all proper formalities. The suggestion of undue influence is not only baseless but offensive. The only influence exerted on Eleanor Langdon was her own fierce desire to protect the great niece she had raised as a daughter from the very people who had discarded her. Croft's voice never rose, but each sentence was a hammer blow, nailing Vance's narrative to the wall. As for the suggestion that my client is a vulnerable young woman in need of guardians, Mia Langdon is a second-year history student at the University of Cambridge. She achieved top grades at A-level. She is articulate, as you will hear. Her response to this campaign of harassment has been to seek legal protection and to prepare to tell her story, in her own words, to a reputable newspaper. These are not the actions of a suggestible child. They are the actions of a resolute and capable adult. He paused, letting the judge absorb it. The application for guardianship is, frankly, absurd. The application to challenge the will is a fishing expedition, designed solely to exert pressure and to freeze assets, to cripple my client's ability to defend herself. The only triage needed here, my lord, is to excise this malicious and frivolous claim before it causes my client further distress. I ask that you dismiss the applications in their entirety and award costs against the applicants. Vance was back on her feet, her composure fraying. My lord, the historical orders are just one perspective. My clients have a different story. They should be allowed to present it, to cross-examine these so-called facts. And on the matter of the will, we have a right to investigate. The dependency, the isolation, these are classic indicators of undue influence. We merely seek a chance to prove it. The judge looked at her over his glasses. Ms. Vance, the different story your clients tell seems to have been concocted very recently. It is at odds with the sworn evidence they gave, by consent, 16 years ago. As for the will, you are making serious allegations. Do you have any evidence, any at all, beyond speculation, to support them? Any witness who will say Eleanor Langdon was confused? Any evidence of coercion? Vance hesitated. A fatal, telling second. We are in the early stages of our investigation. My lord. We need disclosure from Mr. Sterling. We need to see the files, the correspondence, the billing records. So, you have none. The judge concluded flatly. You are asking me to freeze a young woman's inheritance, and to appoint her estranged, and, according to unchallenged evidence, neglectful parents as her guardians, based on speculation and a desire to go on a fishing trip through a deceased woman's private papers. Is that the sum of it? With respect, my lord, thank you. Ms. Vance. I've heard enough on the papers. The judge turned. Mr. Croft. You mentioned witnesses. Yes, my lord. I call Mrs. Agnes Higgins. Mrs. Higgins, looking nervous but resolute in her best church hat, was sworn in. Croft took her gently through her evidence, her decades of service, Eleanor's character, her clear-mindedness, her devotion to Mia. Was Miss Eleanor Langdon, in the months before her death, confused or easily led? Croft asked. Absolutely not. Mrs. Higgins said, her voice firming, sharp as a tack. She knew her own mind. Always did. Especially about Mia. She was determined that girl would be safe and set up for life. No matter what. Vance rose to cross-examine, a predatory gleam in her eye. Mrs. Higgins, you were employed by Eleanor Langdon, were you not? Your pension, your home, they depended on her goodwill. I had a wage, a fair wage, and my cottage is my own, left to me by my mother. Mrs. Higgins retorted, not waiting for Croft to object. I'm not here because I was paid to be. I'm here because I loved Miss Eleanor. And I love that girl. And I won't see her bullied by the likes of them. She pointed a blunt finger at Jonathan and Victoria. Mrs. Higgins. The judge admonished. But there was no heat in it. Vance. Wrong-footed. Pressed on. You're clearly very partisan. Isn't it true that you, like Mr. Sterling, have a vested interest in the current arrangements? In Mia remaining under the influence of those who were close to her aunt, my only interest, Mrs. Higgins said, her chin high, is in Mia's happiness. And she was never happy when those two were in the picture. Only time I ever saw that child truly terrified was when her mother's name was mentioned, before Miss Eleanor took her in. She's happy now. Or she was. Until they crawled out of the woodwork. Vance sat down. Her attempt to impugn Mrs. Higgins's motives having backfired spectacularly. Then came the witness I hadn't known about. Croft called a Mr. Terence Briggs, an elderly man, leaning on a stick, made his way to the stand. He was sworn in. Richard, sitting beside me, leaned in and whispered, retired social worker, handled the original case. My breath caught. Croft established his credentials. Then, Mr. Briggs, in your professional capacity 16 years ago, were you involved in the case of a child? Mia Langdon, I was the senior caseworker. Can you tell the court your findings? Briggs looked not at the lawyers, but at Jonathan and Victoria. His gaze was weary, disillusioned. It was one of the clearest cases of chronic neglect and emotional abandonment I'd seen. The child was chronically anxious, underweight. She had speech delays. The home environment was chaotic, with frequent violent arguments reported by neighbors. The parents' priority was not the child, it was their own financial and social survival. The final incident, where they left the country without ensuring her care, was the culmination of a pattern, not an aberration. Victoria let out a small, stifled wail. Jonathan's face was a mask of thunder. And the court orders? Croft asked. They were necessary. The parents initially contested. But when faced with the evidence, and the fact that returning to fight would likely see criminal charges for child abandonment, they consented. It was a strategic decision on their part. Not an act of parental love, but of damage limitation. Eleanor Langdon was a godsend. She provided the stability, love, and security the child desperately needed. It was a textbook successful intervention. Vance leapt up for cross-examination, her voice icy. Mr. Briggs, that was 16 years ago. People change. Have you had any contact with Mr. and Mrs. Langdon since? No. So you have no idea of their remorse, their personal growth, their enduring love for their daughter. I know the evidence I saw then, Briggs said, unflinching. And I know that love, enduring or otherwise, is demonstrated through action, through presence. For 16 years, the only action taken by these people was to stay away. Until, it seems, money entered the equation. That, in my professional experience, is not a change. It's a consistency. The courtroom was silent. The old man's words, delivered without malice but with devastating professional clarity, hung in the air. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He took the stand, sworn to tell the truth. Vance led him through their rehearsed narrative, the struggles, the terrible mistake of leaving, the constant love, the barriers Eleanor put up. He was good, convincing, the charming, regretful father. Then Croft rose for cross-examination. He approached the witness box slowly. A lion considering a tethered goat? Mr. Langdon, you signed the consent order for the special guardianship. Is that correct? Yes. But, just answer the question. Please. You signed it. You thereby agreed, before a court, that it was in your daughter's best interests for Eleanor Langdon to have sole parental responsibility for her. Yes, Jonathan's jaw worked. In the circumstances at the time? Yes. The circumstances being that you had abandoned her and fled the country to avoid your creditors. Correct, we didn't flee. It was a business trip from which you did not return for several months, and for which you had made no adequate care arrangements for your 4-year-old child. A trip that led to a police investigation for child abandonment. Is that accurate? It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding documented in police reports, social work reports, and a court order. Croft said mildly. He picked up a document. Your conviction for fraud, Mr. Langdon. You defrauded elderly investors of their life savings. Was that also a misunderstanding? Vance objected. My lord, this is prejudicial and unrelated. It goes to character and credibility. My lord, Croft said, and to the pattern of behavior my learned friend dismisses as youthful errors. I'll allow it, but move it along. Mr. Croft. Croft turned back to Jonathan, whose face was now flushed. Was it a misunderstanding? I paid my debt to society. Jonathan hissed. You received a suspended sentence. Your victims received nothing. Do you consider that debt paid? Croft didn't wait for an answer. Now, this enduring love. Can you tell the court the date of your daughter's last birthday before you reappeared? The present you sent? The card? Jonathan stared, his mouth opening and closing. He had no answer. The name of her primary school. Her favorite childhood toy. The first word she ever spoke to you. Silence. A terrible, damning silence. Your Honor, I have no further questions for this witness. Jonathan practically exploded from the witness box, his composure gone. This is a witch hunt. You're twisting everything. She's my daughter. Mine, Mr. Langdon. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. Control yourself, or I will have you removed. Do you understand? Jonathan sank back into his chair beside Victoria, trembling with rage and humiliation. The performance was in tatters. The loving father was gone, and in his place was the angry, entitled man I'd seen at the garden wall. The judge called for a short recess. In the stark, fluorescent-lit hallway, I leaned against the cool stone wall, my legs weak. Richard stood nearby, a solid presence. It's going as well as can be expected, he said quietly. Briggs was the key. He destroyed their credibility. They're losing, I whispered. They've lost this round. The question is the scope of the loss. Back in court, the judge gave his decision. He spoke quickly, precisely. On the application for interim guardianship, dismissed. Mia Langdon is a capable adult. There is not a shred of evidence to suggest otherwise. and a great deal of evidence to suggest the applicant's motives are far from pure. On the application to freeze the assets of the estate, dismissed, the applicants have shown no compelling evidence of a risk to the estate's dissipation. The assets are held in a professionally managed trust. The application appears to be a tactical one, designed to inflict maximum pressure, and is an abusive process. On the application to challenge the validity of the will, I grant permission to proceed on the narrowest possible grounds. The applicants have raised a speculative, weak case on undue influence and testamentary capacity. However, the threshold to strike it out at this stage is high. It may proceed to a full trial. However, he emphasized, fixing Jonathan and Victoria with a gimlet stare. I wish to make my view clear. The evidence of Eleanor Langdon's capacity is strong. The evidence of the applicant's character and motives is deeply troubling. They are on notice that should this claim proceed and fail, they will be liable for the entirety of the costs, which will be substantial. Furthermore, given the history, the media campaign, and the incident of the delivered photograph, I am granting a strengthened non-molestation order in Mia Langdon's favor, with a power of arrest attached. Any breach will result in immediate arrest. He brought his gavel down. Court is adjourned. The parties are to agree directions for the will challenge within 14 days. It was a mixed result. They hadn't been thrown out completely. The shadow of a trial remained. But they had been publicly, legally humiliated. Their guardianship bid crushed. Their asset freeze denied. Their motives questioned from the bench. And a restraining order with teeth now in place. As we gathered our papers, Vance was speaking in low, furious tones to her solicitor. Jonathan and Victoria stood. As they passed our table, Victoria stopped. The tears were gone, wiped away, revealing eyes of pure, unadulterated hatred. She leaned in. Her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. You think you've won? You've just made it worse. You little bitch. We have nothing left to lose now. Nothing. And we will make you pay for this. We will make you wish you'd never been born. Then she turned and followed her husband and lawyer out of the courtroom, leaving the sour scent of her perfume and the chill of her threat hanging in the air. The legal skirmish was over. We had held the high ground. But as Richard had warned, cornered animals are the most dangerous. And as I looked at the empty doorway through which they'd vanished, I knew with a cold certainty, the war was far from over. It had just entered a new, an even darker, phase. The train back to Cornwall was a capsule of exhausted silence. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the courtroom confrontation had drained away, leaving behind a hollow, jangling fatigue. The legal victory, if it could be called that, felt like ash in my mouth. We had won the battle. The guardianship farce was dead. The asset freeze was denied. The judge had all but called my parents liars and opportunists from the bench. Yet, the war persisted. The will challenge, however weak, still hung over me like a toxic cloud, a drawn-out legal purgatory that could last months, even years. And Victoria's parting whisper, a serpent's kiss in the hallowed hall of justice, echoed in my skull. We have nothing left to lose. Mrs. Higgins dozed fitfully opposite me. Richard had stayed in London to begin the cumbersome process of drafting legal directions for the will challenge, a process he assured me was now more about minimizing nuisance than facing a genuine threat. The judge's comments will make it hard for them to find a barrister willing to run a full trial, he'd said, but they are stubborn and spiteful. The challenge itself is a weapon of attrition. The scenery sped by, a blur of green fields and grey sky. I replayed the scene in my head. Jonathan's face as the social worker. Briggs eviscerated his paternal performance, the judge's disdainful tone, the sheer, naked hatred in Victoria's eyes as she delivered her threat. It wasn't about money anymore. Not just about money. It was about humiliation. They had been exposed, scorned, and legally sanctioned. Their response, I feared, would be proportionally ugly. Cliff's End, when we finally reached it in the deepening dusk, felt different. No longer just a sanctuary. It was a command post. The strengthened non-molestation order with a power of arrest was a piece of paper taped to the front door. A legal force field. But paper could be torn. The local police sergeant had called to confirm they'd be doing extra drive-bys. It was reassuring and sickening in equal measure. For the next 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost. The interview with The Guardian was being edited. Anya had sent a draft. Reading my own words, my own pain, rendered into polished prose was a surreal, dissociative experience. It was powerful and true, and it left me feeling scraped raw. Publication was a week away. I felt like a soldier waiting for the artillery barrage to begin, knowing it was my own side firing. On the third morning, driven by a restless need to do something, to feel closer to Eleanor in a way that wasn't tainted by the present ugliness, I decided to finally tackle her study. Not the library with its public-facing books, but her private sanctum, a small, cozy room at the back of the house, overlooking the rose garden. It was where she paid bills, wrote letters, kept her personal papers. I had always knocked before entering. It felt like the last frontier of her privacy. Mrs. Higgins brought me a cup of tea and a determined look. She'd want you in there, my love. It's yours now. All of it. The room smelled of her, lavender, faint cigar smoke, a secret vice, an old paper. Sunshine streamed through the leaded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Her desk was orderly. A blotter, a pot of pens, a photograph of us on the beach, me at about 10, pigtails flying, both of us laughing. My heart clenched. I started with the desk drawers, receipts, household accounts, gardening catalogues, correspondence with friends. Normal, mundane, heartbreakingly ordinary. Then, in the bottom drawer, behind a stack of faded watercolor paper, I found it. A small, sturdy metal strongbox, gunmetal gray, with a combination lock. It was heavier than it looked. I lifted it onto the desk. I had no idea what the combination was. I tried the obvious, her birthday. Nothing. My birthday. The lock stayed fast. The date she'd brought me to Cornwall. I tried a few permutations, my fingers growing clumsy. Nothing. I sat back, frustrated. Then I looked at the photograph on the desk. Our laughter. The sheer, uncomplicated joy of that moment. On a whim, I spun the dials to the date on the photo's edge. Scribbled in Eleanor's neat hand, 15 August, 2016. A perfect Cornish day. The lock clicked open. My breath caught. I lifted the lid. There were no stacks of banknotes. No jewelry. Just files. Neat. Labeled. Archival folders. The top one was marked in her precise script. Langdon. J. V. Inquiries. With a sense of trespass that was now mingled with grim necessity. I opened it. The first page was a covering letter from a firm called Dalton Price. Confidential investigations. The date was from 8 years ago. The body of the letter was a summary of a surveillance and financial report on Jonathan and Victoria Langdon, commissioned by Eleanor Langdon. My eyes scanned the dry, professional language. Subjects continue to exhibit a pattern of financial instability and high-risk behavior. Primary income appears to be derived from short-term, speculative ventures, several of which have attracted regulatory attention. Significant debts maintained with multiple lenders. Spending remains disproportionately high relative to income. Focused on luxury goods, dining, and travel. No evidence of sustained employment or legitimate investment. It was a clinical dissection of a life lived on the edge of other people's money, confirming everything Richard and the court records had said. But it was current, or had been. Eleanor hadn't just known about the past fraud, she'd been monitoring their present. The file contained bank statements. How had the investigator gotten these? Credit reports. Even photographs of them entering casinos, laughing at expensive restaurants. It was a dossier on the life they'd lived while I grew up without them. Beneath that file was another, slimmer one. This contained copies of letters, not typed, but handwritten, in Jonathan's flashy, aggressive script. My blood ran cold as I read. The first was dated about 12 years ago. Eleanor. Times are hard. Victoria is struggling. The thought of Armia is a constant torment. We hear she's doing well with you. And we're grateful. Truly. But a child needs to know her roots. It's not right. This separation. It's playing on Victoria's mind. Her health isn't good. A substantial sum. A gesture of goodwill. Would go a long way to easing her mind. To helping us get back on our feet so we can be the parents Mia deserves. Say. £50. 000. Think of it as an investment in family harmony. I'd hate for Mia to ever have to hear a distorted version of why we're not in her life. Children can be so sensitive. Your brother-in-law, Jonathan, it was a shakedown. A thinly veiled threat, pay us. Or we might tell Mia something distorted. The second letter, a few years later, was more desperate. The amount larger. The third, just 5 years ago, was outright vicious. You've poisoned her against us. You always were a sanctimonious cow, hoarding Dad's money. You stole our child. She's not even your blood. Not really. Do you think she'd look at you the same if she knew the truth about her precious mother? Victoria's finally ready to tell her everything. Unless, of course, you can see your way to making this right. The figure is £200. 000. Final offer. Don't test me. Eleanor. My hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. She's not even your blood. Not really. The words swam before my eyes. The truth about her precious mother. A cold, sick dread pulled in my stomach. What truth? What was he implying? That Victoria wasn't No. It was just more manipulation. More poison. It had to be. But the letters were real. They were proof of extortion. Proof that their reappearance was the culmination of a decade-long campaign of attempted blackmail. Not some sudden flowering of parental love. At the very bottom of the box lay a single, folded sheet of cheap paper. A photocopy of a police report. Not from Surrey. From London. Metropolitan Police. It was a report of an incident in a Chelsea bar. Dated about 15 years ago. Jonathan Langdon was named. The charge, assault occasioning actual bodily harm. The victim was a man. The report noted Langdon had been arrested. Held overnight. But the victim had declined to press charges after an out-of-court settlement. A civil binding over order had been issued. A kind of restraining order. No formal conviction. The report noted. But a record of the arrest and the order remained. Violence. Or at least, the capacity for it. Legally acknowledged. It had never gone to trial. So it wasn't a criminal record. But it was a pattern. Fraud. Extortion. Assault. It painted a picture of a man for whom aggression, financial, verbal, physical, was a tool. I sat amidst the scattered evidence. The dust motes still dancing in the sunbeam that now felt accusatory. Eleanor had known. She had known everything. She had assembled this armory, not out of malice, but to protect me. This box was her final line of defense. To be opened if the walls were breached. They had been. I gathered the files. My movements slow and deliberate. I placed them back in the strongbox. But didn't lock it. This was no longer just my defense, it was my weapon. I called Richard. My voice was eerily calm as I described the contents of the box. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he let out a long, slow breath. The letters are gold. Mia. They are explicit evidence of attempted blackmail. A clear financial motive for their harassment. They destroy any remaining shred of a parental love narrative. The police report, even without a conviction, is powerful corroboration of a propensity for aggression. Especially paired with the recent incident of the delivered photograph. It turns them from misguided parents into calculating predators with a history of menace. What do I do with it? We integrate it into our case. I will submit the letters and the police report as evidence in the will challenge proceedings. I will also send a copy, with a stark covering letter, to their solicitor. The message will be clear. We have moved from defense to attack. We are now in a position to bring a private prosecution for blackmail, or to sue them for harassment causing psychiatric harm. The cost of continuing their legal fantasy just became astronomically high for them. And the thing about my mother. What I might hear, Richard's voice was careful. A classic blackmailer's tactic. Vague. Menacing. designed to instill fear and doubt. It has no substance. He was trying to scare Eleanor. He's trying to scare you. You must not let it. You know who your mother was. Her name is on the will that left you everything she had. Her love is in the walls around you. Do not give his poison space to grow. I wanted to believe him. I did believe him. But the hook was in a tiny, barbed question mark in my soul. Not really your blood. There's something else, I said, pushing the thought down. The community here. The neighbors. They've been watching. One of them, Tom Griffiths. He confronted my parents when they came. He's offered to help. Good, Richard said, a new note of interest in his voice. Community support is not just emotional, it's evidential. It shows you are rooted, supported, and that their presence is disruptive and unwelcome. Would he, and perhaps others, be willing to provide formal statements, not just about the recent visit, but about your childhood here with Eleanor? About the stability and love they witnessed? I think so. Yes. Then ask them. A petition. Or individual statements. It adds another layer of reality to our case. Against their fantasy. It makes this not just a legal dispute, but a moral one between a community and a pair of intruders. That afternoon, I walked down to the boatyard. Tom Griffiths was sanding the hull of an up-tended dinghy. Radio playing old Cornish folk songs. He saw me coming and straightened up, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Miss Mia, heard you had a bit of a dust-up in London. We did. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. For being a lookout. He waved a gnarled hand. Nothing to it. Your aunt was good people. Best of people. We look after our own here. He peered at me. You're looking peaky. They giving you more trouble, I told him. Briefly. About the will challenge. The ongoing threat. My lawyer thinks it would help if people who knew us, who saw me grow up here with Eleanor, were willing to say so. Officially. In statements. Tom's face hardened. I'll do that. And I reckon Bert Penhaligon at the shop will. And old Miss Craddock. And a few others. We don't hold with that sort of carry-on. Vultures. They are. He spat neatly into the shavings. You write it down. What you need. I'll sign it. We all will. The solidarity was a tangible warmth. A bulwark of human decency against the cold scheming from London. Over the next 2 days, a folder of statements grew on my desk. Simple, heartfelt testimonials to a happy childhood, to Eleanor's devotion, to the unnatural, grasping nature of the parents' sudden return. It was powerful in its simplicity. Then, 2 nights after the discovery of the strongbox, the peace shattered. It was 2 a.m. A night of fitful sleep, my mind churning with legal strategies and the ghostly words from Jonathan's letters. A sudden, splitting shriek tore through the house. The alarm, not the gentle ping of the front door sensor, but the full, panicked scream of the perimeter alarm on the kitchen extension. My heart exploded in my chest. I was out of bed, fumbling for the baseball bat Richard had insisted I keep by the bed, a ludicrous, terrifying Americanism that now felt grimly practical. Mrs. Higgins's door flew open across the hall, her face white in the emergency night light. Call the police, I shouted, my voice cracking. Now. And then call Richard. I crept to the top of the stairs, the bat heavy in my sweaty hands. The alarm was a physical assault. A pulsating wall of sound. Downstairs. Lights had come on automatically. I could see the empty hall. The front door still securely closed. The kitchen was at the back. A thud. A scraping sound. From the kitchen. Someone was there. Terror locked my joints. Then a colder, fiercer emotion overrode it. Rage. This was my home. They had driven me to put alarms on it. They had violated Eleanor's peace. And now they were inside. I didn't go down. Richard's training held. Your safety is the only priority. The police's job. I stood, shaking, at the top of the stairs, bat raised, staring into the glaringly lit hall below, waiting for a shape to appear. It felt like an eternity. The alarm screamed on. Then, blessedly, the distant wail of a siren cut through the night, growing rapidly closer. Blue light strobed through the fanlight over the front door. The kitchen noise stopped. 2 police cars skidded to a halt on the gravel. I saw torches. Heard shouts. Mrs. Higgins, wrapped in a dressing gown, hurried down to disarm the alarm as the police called through the letterbox. The sudden silence, when it came, was almost as deafening as the alarm. The police, 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a leather jacket, were thorough. The kitchen window, a small, high casement in the larder, had been forced. The lock was splintered. Muddy footprints, large, from heavy boots, led from the window to the kitchen door and back. Nothing was taken. The house was too full of valuables for a casual burglary. A silver tea set sat in plain view on the dresser. The small wall safe in the study, hidden behind a painting, was untouched. They weren't after property. The detective, a man named Price, said quietly. He had a calm, weary face. They were testing, or sending a message. See, we can get in if we want to. The alarm didn't scare them off quickly enough for them to get far. But they got in. That's the point. My parents, I said, my voice hollow. Likely, Price agreed. Or someone hired by them. Those footprints are from work boots. Common as muck. But the timing, the targeting, it's too coincidental. We'll take casts. But I'm not hopeful. You said they're in London. They claim they are. I said. They'd have an alibi. A flimsy one. But an alibi. He nodded. Standard. It's intimidation. We'll log it. Add it to the file. The non-molestation order makes this a more serious breach. We'll pay them a visit. Ask some pointed questions. It rattles cages. If nothing else. Richard arrived just after dawn. Having driven through the night, he examined the broken window. Spoke at length with Detective Price. His expression growing grimmer by the minute. After the police left, promising increased patrols, we sat in the kitchen. The broken window boarded up with plywood. The first grey light of morning seeping in. The game has changed again, Richard said, his face etched with fatigue and anger. Legal threats, media smears, psychological warfare, those are one thing. Attempted break-ins, physical violation of your home, that is a fundamental escalation. This is now about your personal safety. What do we do? Mrs. Higgins asked, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug. We hit back. Harder and faster. Richard turned to me. The material from the Strongbox. The community statements. The police report from tonight. We bundle it all together. I am not waiting for the will challenge to meander through the courts. I am applying to the High Court next week for a summary judgment to strike out their claim in its entirety, on the grounds that it is frivolous, vexatious, and an abuse of process, and that the applicants are engaging in conduct designed to pervert the course of justice. I will seek a permanent restraining order and an order for indemnity costs. I will also file a separate action against them for harassment, citing the letters, the media campaign, and this break-in. We will bury them in legal liability. It was a declaration of total war. No more defense. No more reaction. A full, frontal legal assault. And the interview? I asked. The Guardian piece, it publishes as planned. It's the public narrative component of the same strategy. We show the world who they are, while the courts dismantle their position legally. He leaned forward. Mia, you must be prepared. This will be brutal for them. They will be facing financial and potentially criminal ruin. Cornered animals. Remember, they may become even more unpredictable. I looked at the boarded-up window. A crude scar on the face of my home. I thought of the love in the community statements. The vile greed in Jonathan's letters. The steadfast, silent presence of the Strongbox Eleanor had left for me. The fear was still there. A cold stone in my gut. But it was now encased in a harder shell of resolution. Do it, I said, my voice clear in the quiet kitchen. Do all of it. I'm done hiding. I'm done being the victim in this story. It's time they learned what it costs to come after me and mine. I went to the study, to the folder of community statements. I took out a fresh sheet of paper. Not a letter to Eleanor this time. A note to myself. a line to anchor the coming storm. They have chosen the war. Now, they will get the battle. And they will lose. Folding it, I tucked it into the strongbox, alongside Eleanor's armory. Our armory now. The siege had escalated, but the fortress was not just stone and mortar. It was truth, law, community, and a legacy of love that was finally ready to fight back. The week before the High Court hearing was a study in controlled, high-stakes preparation. Richard's application for summary judgment was a legal thunderbolt, a 90-page document that wove together the threads of 16 years of neglect, months of harassment, and weeks of escalating threats into a narrative of such damning clarity it felt less like a legal submission and more like an indictment. The bundle of evidence annexed was a weapon, the care orders, the fraud conviction, the private investigator's report, the blackmail letters, the police report for assault, the witness statements from Tom Griffiths and half a dozen other St. Moore's residents, the Daily Courier article, the log of the 2 break-in at Cliff's End, and the Devon and Cornwall police report on the same. It was a dossier of moral and legal bankruptcy. The hearing was listed before Mrs. Justice Armitage, known in legal circles as the scalpel for her incisive, no-nonsense approach. The venue was a larger, more imposing courtroom than the family division. Its wood darker, the air colder. The public gallery this time held a few observers. A journalist from The Guardian, Anya, had secured permission. A court artist, Anne. To my surprise, Tom Griffiths and Mrs. Higgins, who had insisted on coming, sitting ramrod straight in their Sunday best. Faces like stone sentinels. Jonathan and Victoria were already seated. The bravado was gone, replaced by a pinched, grey tension. Their legal team had changed. Pamela Vance, QC, was nowhere to be seen. In her place was a younger, less flamboyant barrister named Mr. Edgerton, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The theatrical loving parents' costume was also absent. They were dressed in simple, almost drab clothing. An attempt, perhaps, at portraying beleaguered simplicity. It was too late. The performance was over. Only the grim business of damage limitation remained. Our team was Richard, Alistair Croft, Casey, and a junior barrister. Richard's presence in the well of the court, sitting behind Croft, was a silent statement of total commitment. This was not just a case, it was a crusade. Mrs. Justice Armitage entered, a woman in her 60s with a severe, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. The proceedings began with dry formalities, but the tension was a live wire in the room. Croft rose to open. He didn't perform. He prosecuted. My lady, this application is brought to strike out the claim of Jonathan and Victoria Langdon, and for associated orders, on the basis that their claim is not only devoid of merit but is a cynical and malicious instrument of harassment. It is, in essence, a legal fraud. He took the court through the history, his dry voice lending a terrible weight to the facts. He presented the timeline not as a family saga, but as a forensic pathology report. The abandonment, the court orders, the conviction, the 16-year silence, then, the pivot, the death of Eleanor Langdon, the inheritance, and the immediate, orchestrated campaign that followed. One might charitably call this coincidence, Croft said, a faint, corrosive dryness in his tone. But as the documentary evidence shows, it was not coincidence. It was a plan, long in gestation. He held up the file containing the blackmail letters. For years, the applicants attempted to extort money from Eleanor Langdon, using the threat of upsetting her great-niece as leverage. They failed. Upon her death, they saw a new, and final, opportunity. They launched a three-pronged assault, legal, media, and psychological. They sought to manipulate the courts, the press, and the mind of a grieving young woman. Their claim against the will is the legal fig leaf for this campaign. It is devoid of any credible evidence. It exists for one purpose only, to apply pressure, to inflict distress, and to create a bargaining chip. He then detailed the campaign, the orchestrated chance meeting at the solicitors, the tearful performance in Cornwall, The placement of the slanted article in the Courier. The delivery of the photograph, a classic tool of emotional blackmail. And finally, the attempted break-in. An act of domestic terrorism. My lady. Designed to shatter the respondent's sense of safety in her own home. He concluded, turning to face Jonathan and Victoria, who refused to meet his gaze. The law exists to protect citizens, not to be weaponized by those who would abuse it. To allow this claim to proceed would be to sanction a grotesque parody of justice. It would tell every vulnerable beneficiary, every grieving heir, that they are fair game for predators who can file a baseless claim and use it as a cover for a campaign of fear. I invite my lady to end this charade, today, and to send the clearest possible message that such conduct will be met with the full, unflinching force of the court's contempt. It was a closing argument delivered as an opening. It set the tone. This was not a debate, it was an execution. Mr. Edgerton rose, looking pale. He had an impossible job. My lady, he began, his voice lacking the resonant confidence of his predecessor. My clients accept that aspects of their past are problematic. They accept that their attempts to re-establish contact have been clumsy. But at its heart, this is a family tragedy, a breakdown in communication. The claim regarding the will, while perhaps speculative, is not made maliciously. They have genuine, residual concerns about the influence exerted on Eleanor Langdon in her final years. They seek only the opportunity to explore those concerns through proper disclosure and, if necessary, at trial. To strike out their claim now is to deny them access to justice. It is to judge them, and their motives, before the facts have been fully tested. It was weak, defensive. He was trying to reframe a siege as a breakdown in communication. Mrs. Justice Armitage peered at him over her glasses. Mr. Edgerton, I have read the bundle. The problematic aspects of your client's past include a court-sanctioned finding of child abandonment and a conviction for fraud. Their clumsy contact includes what appears to be attempted blackmail. She tapped the letters file. And actions that have resulted in a police investigation for harassment and a possible attempted burglary. You speak of testing facts. What facts? Precisely. Do they wish to test that are not already before me? In the form of these damning contemporaneous documents, Edgerton floundered. The mental state of the testator. My lady. The nature of her relationship with Mr. Sterling. These require exploration. Do they? The judge asked, her voice icy. I have an affidavit from her GP of 30 years stating she was of sound mind. I have witness statements from her community attesting to her independence and clarity. I have a will drafted by a reputable firm, executed with all due formalities. Your clients offer what? Speculation. Motivated by what? Mr. Edgerton? By the fact that they were left a conditional bequest of £5,000. While the daughter they abandoned was left everything else. Is that the residual concern? It was a slaughter. Edgerton tried to argue that the strength of the evidence was a matter for trial. The judge cut him off. The purpose of summary judgment, Mr. Edgerton, is to prevent the court time and the parties' resources, particularly the respondent's resources, from being wasted on claims that have no real prospect of success. On the evidence before me, this claim has less than no prospect. It is an abuse. Do you have any witness who can speak to Eleanor Langdon's lack of capacity? Any document that suggests undue influence? Any evidence that isn't a product of your client's own self-serving narrative? Edgerton was silent. He had nothing. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the scratch of the journalist's pen. I will hear from the applicants, the judge said, her voice like a falling blade. Jonathan was called. He took the stand, a diminished figure. Edgerton's questions were soft, trying to elicit a portrait of regret and paternal longing. Jonathan mumbled about mistakes, about wanting to be a family, about his fears regarding the will. He was a ghost of his former blustering self. Then Croft stood for cross-examination. He didn't bother with the past abandonment, that was established. He went straight for the throat. Mr. Langdon. These letters to Eleanor Langdon, demanding money with menacing overtones. You wrote them, correct? Jonathan's eyes darted. They were requests for help. In a difficult time. Requests. I'd hate for Mia to ever have to hear a distorted version. That is a request, it was poorly phrased. She's not even your blood. Not really. What did you mean by that? A jolt went through me. Victoria stifled a gasp. Jonathan went white. I don't recall. It's in your handwriting. Mr. Langdon. In the third letter. What truth about Victoria were you threatening to tell? Nothing. It was a figure of speech. A stupid, angry thing to say. He was panicking. A figure of speech designed to frighten an elderly woman into giving you £200,000. Croft stated flatly. He let the implication hang. Now. The attempted break-in at Cliff's End on the night of the 14th. Where were you? In London. We have receipts. Dinner. A hotel. You could have hired someone. The footprint suggests work boots. Do you own a pair of work boots? Mr. Langdon, this is outrageous conjecture, is it? You have a documented history of aggression. Do you not? This police report for assault, that was dismissed, a binding over order was issued. Because the victim was paid off. Just as you tried to get money from Eleanor Langdon. It's a pattern. Mr. Langdon, when you don't get what you want, you turn to threats, to intimidation, to violence. This legal claim is simply another form of intimidation, isn't it? A way to keep pressing, to keep hurting Mia, because she won't give you what you want. Jonathan lost all control. She owes us, he shouted, his voice cracking. The mask of wounded fatherhood incinerated by sheer, sputtering rage. She's living in our family's house, with our family's money. That old bitch stole her. And now this lawyer is helping her steal what's rightfully ours. We're her parents. It's ours. It's all ours. The courtroom froze. His words echoed off the paneled walls. A naked, screaming confession of entitlement and greed. Victoria had her face in her hands. Their own barrister, Edgerton, looked at the ceiling in despair. Mrs. Justice Armitage did not need to gavel for order. The silence that followed Jonathan's outburst was more potent. She simply looked at him. Her expression one of profound, judicial disgust. Do you have any further questions for this witness? Mr. Croft, no. My lady, the witness may stand down. Jonathan stumbled back to his seat. His breath coming in ragged gasps. The truth finally, catastrophically, exposed. Croft called no further witnesses. The evidence was conclusive. In his closing, he was brief. My lady, the applicant has, in his own words, revealed the true nature of this claim. It is not about family. It is about possession. It's all ours. The law exists to protect people from such predation. I ask for the orders sought. Edgerton's closing was a whispered, perfunctory plea for mercy, which the judge ignored. She gave her judgment extempore. From the bench, a sign of her absolute certainty. This is, without doubt, one of the most cynical and manipulative abuses of the court's process I have had the misfortune to encounter. She began, her voice precise and cold. The claim by Jonathan and Victoria Langdon is totally without merit. It is indeed frivolous, vexatious, and an abuse of process. It is a facade constructed to legitimize a campaign of harassment, blackmail, and intimidation against their own daughter. A campaign that has escalated to the point of a criminal violation of her home. She detailed the evidence. Her summation a forensic demolition. She gave no credence to the challenge to the will. Eleanor Langdon's will is valid. Her mental capacity is unimpeachable. Her motives were clear and laudable, to protect the child she raised from the people who had demonstrably failed her. Then she turned to the applicants. Your conduct has been despicable. You abandoned your child. You attempted to blackmail her guardian. You exploited her grief upon that guardian's death. You manipulated the media. You engaged in psychological terror. And you have the audacity to come to this court seeking its authority to further your predation. You will receive no such authority from me. She granted the summary judgment, striking out their claim in its entirety. She made the strengthened non-molestation order permanent, with a power of arrest. Then she turned to costs. The respondent has been put to vast entirely unnecessary expense in defending this malicious claim. She has also endured immeasurable distress. I order that the applicants, Jonathan and Victoria Langdon, pay the costs of these proceedings, and of the entire will challenge, on an indemnity basis. This is not standard costs. This is a punitive order, reflecting the court's condemnation of your conduct. You will also pay the costs of today's application. The total will be assessed, but I direct it to be done urgently. A substantial interim payment is to be made within 14 days. Indemnity costs. The most severe cost order possible, meaning my parents would have to pay almost every penny of our legal bills, as well as their own. It was financial annihilation. Jonathan looked as if he'd been shot. Victoria was weeping silently, shaking her head, but the judge wasn't finished. Finally, she said, fixing them with a stare that could have etched glass, I am referring the papers in this matter, including the evidence of blackmail and the circumstances of the break-in at Cliff's End, to the Crown Prosecution Service with a recommendation that they consider charges of harassment, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit burglary. The protection of the court extends beyond costs. It extends to the criminal law. It was over. Completely, utterly over. The legal edifice they had tried to build had not just collapsed, it had been vaporized, and they were buried in the rubble. The judge rose. We stood. As she left, the formal tension broke. Richard let out a long, slow breath. Croft allowed himself a small, tight smile as he gathered his papers. Across the room, chaos. Edgerton was speaking in low, urgent tones to Jonathan, who was just staring blankly ahead. Victoria was sobbing openly now, the sound raw and hopeless. A court clerk approached them with paperwork. Tom Griffiths and Mrs. Higgins came down from the gallery. Mrs. Higgins hugged me fiercely. Justice, she whispered, her voice thick. Pure justice. I felt numb. The relief was so profound it was indistinguishable from shock. Richard touched my elbow. Let's go. There's nothing more for you here. As we turned to leave, Victoria suddenly broke away from her husband and solicitor. She took 2 stumbling steps towards me, her face a ruin of mascara and hatred. The court security officer moved, but she stopped, just out of reach. You, she hissed, the word dripping with venom. You vicious, vindictive little cow. You've ruined us. Do you hear me? Ruined. We're your parents. We gave you life. And you've destroyed ours. I hope you're happy. I hope you enjoy your blood money in that house. With that lawyer. You're dead to me. Do you hear? Dead. The words, meant to wound, fell flat. They were the last, desperate scrape of a broken weapon. I looked at her, this stranger who had given birth to me, and felt nothing. No fear. No anger. Not even pity. Just a vast, empty silence where a mother should have been. The feeling, I said, my voice calm and clear in the hushed room, is entirely mutual. I turned my back on her, on both of them, and walked out of the courtroom, flanked by my allies, leaving the architects of my childhood nightmare to face the ruins of the one they had tried to build for me. The war, at long last, was over. The silence, in the weeks that followed, was of a different quality. It was not the tense, watchful quiet of the siege, nor the hollow, grieving stillness after Eleanor's death. It was a deep, pervasive calm, like the hush that settles over a landscape after a violent storm has finally blown itself out. The air itself felt lighter, easier to breathe. The immediate aftermath of the court ruling was a whirlwind of quiet, efficient activity, all of it orchestrated by Richard. The indemnity costs order was a financial guillotine. My parents' solicitor, the unfortunate Mr. Edgerton, contacted Richard to begin negotiations almost immediately. They had no hope of paying. Their claim was dead, and they were now staring at a legal bill from our side that would easily exceed 6 figures. On top of their own, the specter of a criminal referral to the CPS loomed. The choice Richard presented them, through their lawyer, was brutal in its simplicity: sign a legally binding undertaking to never contact me again, to never speak of me or Eleanor to the media, and to formally withdraw any and all claims against the estate. And in return, we would not actively pursue the costs order to bankruptcy, though a token, manageable sum would be required, and we would indicate to the CPS that a criminal prosecution might not be in the public interest. Given the civil outcome, it was a bargain with the devil, but they were in no position to refuse. They signed. Their surrender was complete, abject, and final. I received the news via a brief, dry email from Richard. The matter is concluded. The undertaking is watertight. You are free. I read the 3 sentences over and over, sitting at the kitchen table at Cliff's End, the morning sun streaming in. You are free. The words seemed to shimmer on the screen. Too vast, too abstract to comprehend. Mrs. Higgins, sensing the shift, simply placed a fresh pot of tea beside me and squeezed my shoulder, her eyes bright. No words were needed. The Guardian piece by Anya was published 2 days after the hearing. It was everything we had hoped for and worse to read. It was elegant, devastating, and fair. It laid out the facts without sensation, giving weight to the legal documents, the history, the psychological toll. It quoted the blackmail letters. It described the broken window at Cliff's End. It gave a platform to Tom Griffiths and other villagers, whose simple, steadfast words about Eleanor and me were more powerful than any legal argument. My parents were not painted as monsters, but as tragic, venal figures whose own choices had led them to this abyss. I was not a victim, but a survivor. Eleanor was not a saint, but a woman of profound love and formidable foresight. The article sparked commentary, editorials about inheritance law and familial duty, but it didn't spark a circus. The truth, presented with dignity, had a way of dampening frenzy. I gave no follow-up interviews. Richard's office handled the few inquiries with a firm no comment. The story, having been told properly, began to recede from public view. Life, stubbornly, began to reassert its mundane rhythms. I returned to Cambridge for the final weeks of the Lent term. The transition was surreal. To walk from the grand, Gothic drama of the High Court back to the hushed, ancient stone of college libraries, to trade legal submissions for essays on the Wars of the Roses, was a form of cognitive whiplash. My friends were wonderfully, tactfully normal. They asked how I was, listened, offered wine and terrible films, and then talked about their own essay crises and dating disasters. It was a lifeline to a world where I was just Mia, the history student, not Mia, the heiress under siege. But Cambridge, for the first time, felt temporary. My roots, I realized with a clarity that was both painful and reassuring, were now sunk deep into the rocky soil of Cornwall. When term ended, I went straight back to Cliff's End, not for shelter, but for home. A few days after my return, Richard came down from London. It was a social visit, he said, though with Richard, the line between professional and personal was elegantly blurred. He arrived just before lunch, bearing a bottle of excellent claret and a folder that was noticeably slimmer than any I'd seen him carry before. We ate in the sunroom, Mrs. Higgins having outdone herself with a lobster salad and fresh bread. The conversation was easy. About my studies. About a tricky case he was handling for a client in Hong Kong. About the perils of pruning roses. The shadow of the last few months was present, but it was a receding shadow, no longer swallowing the light. After lunch, we took our coffee to the library. The June sun was warm, glinting off the sea beyond the windows. Richard placed the slim folder on the table between us. There are some final, personal items to conclude, he said, his tone shifting minutely. The legal and financial architecture is all in place. The trust is settled. The house is unequivocally yours. The undertakings are filed. My formal role as executor is nearly complete. But Eleanor left 2 things with me, to be given to you when the disturbance, as she called it, was over. My breath caught. More weapons? I asked. A half joke. A faint smile touched his lips. No, not weapons. Explanations. And a gift. He opened the folder. The first item was a single sheet of paper. A copy of a will codicil I hadn't seen. He handed it to me. It was brief. Just a few lines. dated a year before she died. It left a specified sum, a generous but not extravagant amount, to be paid to Richard's firm upon the successful defense of the estate against any challenge from Jonathan or Victoria. Her way of ensuring my firm was motivated, he said quietly, and of absolving you of the cost. She knew a fight would be expensive. She wanted it funded separately. The battle was her last gift to you. 2. Mia. Prepaid. I stared at the paper, a new lump forming in my throat. She had thought of everything, even the bill. The second, Richard said, his voice softening further. Is this? He took out a cream vellum envelope, sealed with a daub of dark red wax impressed with what I recognized as her signet ring. My name was written on the front in her familiar, flowing hand. For Mia. She wrote this the same day she signed the codicil. She gave it to me with strict instructions. It was for you. And only you. After any legal challenge from your parents was resolved. She said it contained things she couldn't bring herself to say to your face. For fear of burdening you with anger or fear while she was alive. She wanted you to have a life unclouded by that. For as long as possible. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The wax cracked with a soft, final sound. I unfolded the thick paper. My dearest Mia. If you are reading this, then it means two things. First, and the thought brings me both sorrow and joy. It means I am gone. I'm so sorry to have left you. My darling girl. The greatest privilege of my life was being your mother. Never doubt that. Second, it means Jonathan and Victoria have done what I long feared they might. And you have had to face them. My heart aches for the pain this will have caused you. I fought so hard to build a wall between you and that past. I wanted the fortress to hold forever. But if it has been tested, then I hope with all my soul that you have had Richard Sterling by your side. He is the best man I know. And the sharpest mind. Trust him. He was my chosen cornerstone for that wall. You will, by now, have seen the file in my strongbox. I am sorry for the ugliness it contains. I kept it not to poison your mind, but to arm you with the truth. People like them trade in lies and manipulated feelings. The truth, however ugly, is an anchor. It holds fast in any storm. Their words, their actions, their very history, that is the truth of them. Do not let their performances, their tears, their later fabrications, ever make you doubt the reality you lived as a child. You were left. You were forgotten. Then you were loved. Fiercely and completely. By me. That is your history. Cling to it. About the money. The house. They are tools. My love. They are not a burden. Nor are they a trophy. They are the means to a life of choice. Your choice. Use them to live fully. To travel. To learn. To create. To love without fear of want. Use them to make beauty. As we tried to do together in this house by the sea. Don't let the shadow of their grabbing hands fall across it. This house is joy. It is peace. It is us. Fill it with that spirit again. And finally, the most difficult thing. Jonathan's vile hint about blood. It is, as all his words are, a weapon. But like any weapon, it is forged from a sliver of something real. Twisted for harm. The truth is this, Victoria. For reasons I will never fully understand. Suffered a severe breakdown after you were born. A profound postnatal depression that slid into something darker. She was, for a time, incapable. Jonathan was feckless and absent. In those first, chaotic months, you were cared for more by a series of nurses, and by me during my visits, than by your mother. The bond was fractured before it could properly form. In his twisted logic, this makes you not really her blood in an emotional sense. It is a cruel distortion of a medical tragedy. You are her biological daughter. But you must understand, biology is a thread, not a chain. It is not a bond. The bond we built, you and I, day by day, laugh by laugh, tear by tear, that is what made us mother and daughter. That is the only truth that matters. Do not let his poison make you question the foundation of your own life. You are my daughter. I chose you every single day. And I would choose you again. In every lifetime. Be happy. My brave, wonderful girl. Live a great and joyful life. It is the only revenge worth having. And the only memorial I could ever want. All my love. Now and always. Eleanor. I finished reading. The words blurring. A storm of emotions broke inside me, grief. So sharp and fresh it stole my breath, a towering, righteous anger at Jonathan for wielding such a secret as a blade, and, rising above it all, an overwhelming, crushing wave of love for the woman who had written this, who had thought so far ahead, who had loved me with such ferocious, clear-eyed wisdom. I cried then, great, heaving sobs that seemed to come from a place deeper than the recent battles, from the core of the loss itself. Richard did not speak. He simply passed me a linen handkerchief and waited, a steady, silent presence, while the tempest passed. When I could breathe again, my eyes saw but my mind clearer than it had been in months. I looked at him. She knew. She knew everything. She did. He said gently. And she loved you enough to prepare for the worst, while giving you a childhood filled with the best. The thing about Victoria. The breakdown. It explains, perhaps, a small part of the incomprehensible. It does not excuse the abandonment. It certainly doesn't excuse their later actions. Eleanor was right. It is medical history, twisted into a weapon. You must let it be just that, history. I nodded, folding the letter carefully, holding it to my chest. I will. And I knew I would. The hook of doubt Jonathan had tried to set was now, finally, dislodged and cast away. Eleanor's words were the truth. My truth. Later that week, I acted on an idea that had been forming. I asked Richard to draw up the paperwork to establish a small charitable trust, the Eleanor Langdon Bursary. It would provide grants to young people from Cornwall to pursue further education or training in the arts, music, painting, writing, craftsmanship. It was a nod to her love of beauty, to the creative soul of the place she loved. The funding came from the investment income of the main trust. It felt right. It felt like using the tool, as she'd said, to create something. I also met with a local architect, not to make grand changes to Cliff's End, but to make it live again. We planned to update the heating system, to refurbish the kitchen while keeping its soul, to turn two of the larger, unused bedrooms into a proper guest suite. I had an idea, still nebulous, of perhaps one day offering the house as a short-term let for other families, for artists seeking retreat, for people who needed a dose of the peace it offered. The house was too full of love to be a museum. It needed life. One evening, I invited Tom Griffiths, Miss Penhaligon, Bert from the post office, and a few other neighbors for a proper Cornish cream tea in the garden. It was my thank you. We ate scones with clotted cream and jam, drank strong tea, and talked of everything but the court case. They told stories of Eleanor I'd never heard, of her winning the village flower show with a rogue dahlia, of her secretly funding the repair of the village hall roof. They were my family, as real as any bound by blood. As summer deepened, I found a new rhythm. Mornings were for reading in the library or walking the coastal path. Afternoons, I'd help Mrs. Higgins in the garden or pore over the architect's plans. Evenings, I'd light a fire if the sea mist rolled in, and simply sit, listening to the house settle, feeling the vast, quiet presence of the sea. The past was not forgotten. The scars were there, thin and silvered. I still started at sudden noises. I still felt a cold trickle of dread sometimes when the post arrived. But the fear was no longer in charge. It was a relic, a ghost in a sunlit house. One evening, near the end of August, I went for a long walk as the sun began its slow, spectacular descent into the sea. I walked beyond the headland, to a secluded cove Eleanor and I had called our beach. The tide was far out, leaving a vast, damp plain of sand streaked with gold and rose from the setting sun. The only sounds were the sigh of the retreating waves and the distant cry of gulls. I stood at the water's edge, the cool foam kissing my toes. I thought of the little girl left on the school steps, the teenager laughing in this very spot with Eleanor, the young woman trembling in a solicitor's office, then in a courtroom, the heiress in a boarded-up kitchen, and now, just me, Mia, standing alone on a beach, whole, free, and unafraid. The inheritance had never been the house or the money. Not really. It had been Eleanor's love. A love so vast and strategic it had built defenses I hadn't known I needed. Manned by a lawyer-turned-friend and a community-turned-shield. It had been her faith in me. A faith that had given me the strength to find my own voice. To fight my own battles. And to finally stand on my own 2 feet. The fortune was freedom. The house was home. But the real legacy, the priceless one, was the unshakable knowledge that I had been loved. Am loved. And am capable of building a life worthy of that love. A soft wind came off the sea, carrying the scent of salt and coming night. I looked out at the horizon, where the last sliver of sun dissolved into a molten line of fire. I'm okay, Eleanor, I said quietly, to the wind, to the sea, to the memory that lived in the stones of the house behind me. I'm really okay. And I will be. I turned and began the walk back up the cliff path, towards the warm, golden lights of Cliff's End, just beginning to wink in the gathering dusk. The past was behind me. A story now, written and closed. The future was a blank page. And for the first time, the thought filled me not with fear, but with a quiet, steady, and profoundly grateful anticipation.